road trip sections. You know, we had a couple hours in the car. Well, he like laid over and fell asleep, and Bridget like put a stuffy under his head and put her blankie on him in a very rare moment of extraordinary kindness and generosity. And I know, and Al wakes up. Yeah. He hasn't quite put two and two together yet. It does. I'm like, please don't ever change.
Yeah.
This is. Yeah.
Freezing time is that cryogenics?
Yeah, it's not unreasonable.
Even coming up valley?
Well, the rock scaling is happening. Yeah, it seems like they're holding both
10
lanes.
to 2. 10 to 2.
Yeah, they're holding both lanes, all 4 lanes.
In
And they
case.
actually take a big drop down.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Where is that at?
Makes sense.
My favorite are the 2 rocks. The 2 rocks that have been sitting there for a couple of years. That reminder. Good to see you, Mike.
We're just waiting for Patty to come back. Are you ready, Andorra? Okay, great. I'll let you know. She's just getting water. Oh, okay. Okay. Should we? I'm going to avoid that on the way back. Right by the, Aspen Village. Oh, really? All I saw was a big truck that looked fine. They had moved everything to the middle, and then, well, it looked like the hood was ripped because the inside of the car wasn't smushed. Like the driving wheel wasn't like up against the seat. It just looked like they had fire trucks. I don't know. Something bad. Okay, is this your guy? Gary, I'm wondering, do we need to amend the agenda or are we just waiting? Okay. All right, why don't we give you guys a moment to get set up with tech and presentations before we go live so we aren't just sitting in dead air. Well, we're not live yet. It's okay. You guys still haven't set up. No, that's okay. I just don't want to be. You tell me, so I know. Thanks. Yes, of course. Yes, nice to see you. Hi, welcome everyone to the Picken County Board of County Commissioners work session on Tuesday, May 20th. And we are going to start our work session this afternoon with a conversation about the Crown Special Recreation Area on the BLM e-bike environmental assessment with staff from the Bureau of Land Management and Picken County Open Space and Trails. And I'll turn it over to our OST Director, Gary Tenenbaum. Hi.
Hi. Thanks. I'm Gary Tenenbaum. I'm the Director of Picken County Open Space and Trails. And today,
Alan Spinski from the BLM will just be giving you an update on the process that they're doing throughout their field office to look at potential for e-bikes on BLM lands. And they just, why they're here, why I'm here is, one of the areas is is it on this one too?
Someone needs to
Back room.
mute.
Isn't that not in the control room?
That it? Great. I don't want to hear myself twice. So they're doing this throughout the Colorado River Valley field office. But one of the big areas they're looking at for what concerns us is the crown. And on the crown, we, Pickens County Open Space and Trails, manages the two major portals on Prince Creek and at Glacier on the Hookspur side. So we are here to, the BLM has been an incredible partner with us over the years. Our federal land managers have been, obviously all our lands usually touch a federal land, and all our trails do that too. So trying to have seamless management of the entire system is important. But, obviously what happens on the BLM doesn't always happen on Pickens County. We go through our own management processes, planning processes, and we do our own planning. But in this case, the BLM, he'll give you an update on why they're doing it and what they're doing throughout their whole field office and the public process on it. There's no decisions today for you guys to make. It's a way for you guys to give them some feedback as they go into this. We are partnering with them because people don't understand when you're on Pickens County Open Space or BLM. They don't see the boundaries. They don't know the boundaries. So, getting feedback is incredibly important, not just to them, but also to us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alan, and he can give you an update on where you're at.
Everybody's giving him a mic.
Yeah, you can put this one there.
And Alan, before you get started, do you prefer to get through the whole presentation, or do you welcome questions as you go?
I think we can do questions at the end.
Okay, sounds good.
Yep. Well, thank you, Gary, for the introduction and the little summary of why we're here today. So again, appreciate the commissioner's time here and hearing this presentation to talk about e-bikes on BLM lands within our field office. And again, I'm Alan Sapinski. I'm a recreation planner at the BLM field office, which is located in Silt. So in January of 2024, our office received a letter from the local mountain bike community asking that our office consider authorizing e-bikes, Class 1 e-bikes, on our designated mechanized routes, those being trails open to mountain bikes. And we will now be going into an environmental assessment project at our office to analyze adding e-bikes to traditional mountain bike trails. And that authorization will be reviewed in an environmental assessment, and that EA for short will include alternatives, and some of those alternatives could exclude some trails based on resource concerns, public feedback that we get through the community, through adjacent land managers, so that EA can have different alternatives that our field manager can select from with this e-bike EA. And one of the key challenges that we're up against in our field office, and Gary already stated it, was our field office. We are adjacent to a lot of different land managers, that being the Forest Service, but mainly local towns and local counties. So having that consistent management from a town trailhead that goes right onto BLM land is our goal here. So we're doing these coordination meetings with Pickens County, Eagle County, all the various towns within our field office. We've started these coordination meetings over the winter, and we'll continue them through the spring, summer, fall, and then look to analyze the EA this upcoming winter. a little bit of background about our field office. So our field office manages about 600,000 acres across Garfield, Eagle, Pitkin, and Rio Blanco counties. So it's a pretty extensive area with a lot of urban interface. 34,100 acres of the whole field office is a designated SRMA. So in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small portion where recreation is a focused management objective. And one of those areas is the Crown, where that area is managed with a focus on recreation, specifically mountain biking. And that was a decision made in our 2015 resource management plan. We have about 1,600 miles of routes, which is a pretty interesting number there. A lot of endless work to be done out in the field managing those routes.
What's the whatever this, Crystal Forestry Office or something? What is that? It's the last word on the previous slide. It's the first line here.
Colorado River Valley Field Office.
For BLM.
Correct.
Thank you.
So of those approximately 1,600 miles of routes, 675 of those are open to motorized uses / all modes of transportation. Those are mostly dirt roads, therefore open to Class 1 e-bikes. So this slide is kind of painting the picture of what's currently open to e-bike riders, which is, in short, all of our motorized routes, which is not really the mountain biking experience, riding a double track or essentially a road. We have about 200 miles of routes open to mechanized uses, so that's really the number that this EA would analyze is, of those 200 miles of routes, how many, if any, are we going to open up to e-bikes? Currently, 20 of those are open to e-bikes over in the Grand Hogback Trails near Rifle. And here's an overview map of our field office. So the gold color there is BLM lands. So we extend into the Roaring Fork Valley. Again, the Crown being a highlight there as a SRMA. And then over in the Eagle Valley, we have quite an extensive contiguous BLM lands there. And then down the Colorado River Valley all the way into Parachute. And we serve the communities of Rifle, Silt, and Oakcastle. A lot of different communities in the area. And a bit more focus on the Crown here. So currently, this is a map of routes that are open to e-bikes on the Crown, that being the routes that are open to motorized uses, just to paint a picture of the current situation with e-bike authorization. And then this map shows in blue the routes that would be analyzed to potentially change to add e-bikes. And then this map also includes the Pitkin County open space trails coming out of the bullpen parking lot there in Prince Creek, and then over on the northeast side, the Glacier open space trail.
And they're not being proposed to be open, but it'll be a question to you guys. You know, if the BLM does choose to do this, you know, what does the county want to do with theirs? The Open Space and Trails Board had this review back in November, so they're getting kind of the similar review of you before they do the public process.
So the process, as I mentioned, our field office is engaging with community groups and local governments to identify concerns and develop environmental assessment alternatives. The rubber will really meet the road when we, later this fall, winter, when we have the proposed action and get a EA number and officially start the EA. And when we put that out for public scoping, that's when we're going to be taking in those public scoping comments, identifying substantive comments, that being those comments that identify resource concerns, and then developing our final alternatives that we would we would analyze. We'll make that public scoping process public through e-planning, which is an online way we can collect our scoping comments, and we can share that with local news outlets and of course our partner groups to get that word out. And I've included a link, and I'll just say it, the Moab field office recently did public scoping for a similar authorization of allowing e-bikes on trails in the Moab area. So it's a good example to look at, and I've read through the scoping comments for that project, so it was a lot, as one would imagine, for the popularity of that area. But they bring up some interesting concerns, and I think some interesting alternatives may come from those comments. And a little bit about some of the data we've already collected on the topic of e-bikes. So RFMBA and BLM did a survey back in March of 2024. Some may have been aware of that, but that was really focused on the mountain bike community. And there's, I would say, pretty good response, pretty good number of responses, that being about 1,300. And just as a highlight, the majority answered yes, that they would like to use an e-bike now or in the future on BLM mechanized trails. And again, coordination meetings with our local town governments is the steps we have taken so far. I'd also like to highlight, happening this weekend, we're doing a visitor use survey on the Crown in the Roaring Fork Valley and over in Hardscrabble in the Eagle Valley. So that survey has been planned for a couple years now, and really the survey will focus on visitor experiences and benefits to determine if we're meeting our recreation management objectives that we've spelled out in our 2015 RMP. And we're partnering with the University of Alaska Fairbanks and CMU here locally. The BLM has a contract through them to do these type of surveys. Survey locations for the Crown will be at the Prince Creek Trailhead / Bullpen parking lot, the Hook Spur area, and then the Upper Crown parking lot at the saddle of, I think it's East Soapers Creek and Prince Creek Road. And participants can take the survey in person or by mail or online. And there will be a question on that survey regarding e-bike management. And here's a flyer that we'll likely be posting out at the trailhead, so you can scan that QR code and take the survey straight from there. And then here's an example of a question. So just to provide more info on this survey, our resource management plan identified benefits to the user, and some of them are spelled out here, and kind of two categories of desirability and attainment. So our recreation management objectives are really aimed at having a 4 or higher on these specific items listed here. So that's the information we're looking at for this survey. So are we still identifying the desirability of these benefits? And then is the user meeting those benefits? And we would say it would be meeting if it were a 4 or higher based on these survey results. And there's experiences of the user, benefits to the user, and then outcomes of the user. So a little bit on the survey there. And that's all that I had prepared, and I'm sure there's questions, so I guess I'll kick it over to Picken County if you guys want to add anything more before we go into questions.
All right, board members, questions for?
I'd like to see that address for the Moab thing again. I tried to look it up without the
I've
link
got it.
that
I'll
you
send it to
shared, but I couldn't find it.
Greg said he'll share it with
I'll share it with you.
Thank you.
group. Go ahead, Greg.
Couple things. One, I'd love to see the hardscrabble, is it hardscrabble map, just to see where that is, if you've got that map handy, if you can throw that up. Couple observations. One, it seems like in that survey, it was a survey of mountain bikers. 64% were in favor of allowing e-bikes, 34% of mountain bikers I surveyed. Is that correct? Were not in favor. That's the assumption I got from that survey. So it's a fairly limited scope. I'm just wondering if that's a broad enough sampling of people. And I was interested in what Moab has done. It's really worth reading. And I see that Park City, Utah has a program where they'll allow e-bikes for an older age group, because the only people who really call me and are frustrated about e-bikes are guys in their 70s and 80s who want to go out and ride, and it's pretty hard to argue with them, you know, that they would be at it, you know, maybe it would help level the field for them so they could go out and enjoy those trails. I'm not sure about everybody though. And so that's another question is like I think BLM will look at what Park City's done with allowing e-bikes for older age group. And the final thing is a class 1 e-bike's allowed, but if you ask anybody on a trail today, whether it's a class 1 or a class 3, nobody's going to know. Like how are you going to be able to enforce that? If you open it to class 1, you're opening it to everybody is my concern. So that means speeds will increase and damage to terrain will probably increase as well, and conflict. So I'm trepidatious about that. If it's going to be class 1, to me it's like that isn't going to do it. It needs to be everybody or nobody, right? How do we enforce that?
Yeah, enforcement is certainly going to be a challenge, and I think that's where these conversations are good to have now between BLM and say Pitkin County, and you know, how can we work together to have first education at our trailheads, and then second leverage both our law enforcement and our park rangers to be able to enforce the rules. And I know, you know, class 1 e-bikes don't have throttles, so I mean that's one way. If the bike has a throttle, then it's not allowed, but it's still going to be a challenge, and I think education is the big one. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's really up to the user. I mean, there's nobody there keeping dirt bikes off of mountain bike trails. It's up to that dirt biker to be respectful. It's up to that mountain biker not to go on a horse trail. But that's through education. That's through, hey, if you disrespect this, these trails could be closed to that use. So that's
another question just on the Crown. There, I see the 2 access points that go through open space land, but there's at least 1, if not 2 other accesses from the north and the south.
Yeah.
Well, there's the road.
You can get you on the basalt side.
Can you show? Yeah,
see,
thank you.
there you go. You see the pink. The pink is the Glacier Trail, but if you go further away from that, you don't have. Well, go to the next slide. Okay, so you see those that's off of Hooks. That's still off the Rio Grande Trail there, and that's just directly onto BLM. So you can, so that's a way that's onto the BLM directly from the Rio Grande
So
Trail.
there's access.
And the other side is if you don't take that pink trail, you can go up Prince Creek Road and get right to the BLM from there,
Go in from the Crown.
Either here or at the top.
or at the top.
And if you're on an e-bike, it's no problem. You can ride up that hill, no problem. Okay, thanks. Those are my questions, concerns.
I'll ask a bit of a follow-up. So relative to the EA, will the scope of it include some of the things that Greg has raised? You know, I guess I would imagine that it would sort of address any additional wear and tear on the land, but will it look at things like increased speeds of users, or is that in the scope of it?
yes, the EA will likely reference, research that's been done that analyzes e-bike user behavior.
Okay. Other questions, Francie?
Yeah, hi, I spoke with you in your office a few months ago about Alcon Fields.
Yep.
And I live right at the bullpen, right above it, and I'm really concerned about increased usage in that area. I'm sure Gary thinks I'm a broken wheel on this, but it's a really crowded parking lot right now. I never see the BLM there. I can't even imagine how enforcement could possibly take place on those trails except in somebody's leisure time. We already have significant reduction in our Forest Service staff. OST is trying to cover there, so I don't see enforcement happening there. And so I'm concerned about the number of cars and the increased number of bikes. I'm concerned about people who walk the trail and run into somebody using an e-bike. And I know it's just pedal assist, but 30 miles an hour is pretty damn fast if you're walking and there's something at 30 miles an hour on the same trail with you. So I'm concerned about it. I'll engage in the scoping, but I'm concerned.
Well, the two pink areas, Francie, we control.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, so we'll be the ones enforcing those, like at the bullpen and
At there, right?
yeah, and that on those pink trails. But
Yeah.
no, I get your point. On the rest of it, it's
I mean, if you drive up to the campground and get out there and, you're out of reach of OST.
And just to comment on one potential benefit of e-bike use, and that being the town to crown. So there's potential that, it would encourage people to ride from town, reducing trailhead congestion.
There have been more people riding from town generally anyway, but, which is another problem on Prince Creek Road, but preferable to the parking lot, I agree, but it's a cluster on Prince Creek Road now.
Jeffrey and then Patty.
I would enjoy to hear your experience with Hogback. Like, what have you learned? How long has that been open? What's the takeaway? You've got 20 miles that are already e-bikes today, so give us again, download, and then we'll come back to it. But sort of the footnote would be, should we be coordinating closure times? And so if we're coordinating e-bikes across property, should we also look to a May 1st? Again, I'm a huge fan of BLM. They show up April 15th. I paid my taxes. The gates are open. It's so cool. Thank you, Silt office. I'm down at the Light Hill Trail, but I'd love to hear your experience again with Hogback.
So with the Hogback, that EA was signed in 2020, and we broke ground, I think, towards the end of 2020. So first real riding season was 2021. It's been going great. I mean, as far as the trail experience out there, users really enjoy it, especially beginner intermediates. And then as far as e-bikes goes, we haven't heard anything. I've seen some e-bike users out there. The majority of users I see are on a traditional mountain bike, but we haven't heard we haven't had any comments regarding e-bikes there.
Thank you.
Patty.
Yeah, I had shared Greg's concerns and Francie's with enforcement. We always share that concern. It's hard when you don't have enough boots on the ground, especially with our federal departments. Those boots are being cut. And we're going to see how this next year goes with trying to keep people safe out there and the wildlife safe and the environment safe. When we know you guys are getting stretched thin, and we appreciate the time you put in. Also, Greg's question about the other survey, was that whose survey was that? I thought it was the, I don't know, was it BLM or was it the Roaring Fork Bike Association, Mountain Bike Association?
Right.
It was an RFMBA survey with, coordination from our office. But
Okay.
officially, to put our stamp on a survey, we go through, for instance, the University of Alaska, wherever
I
we
think
have
that's
a
great.
contract.
Okay. Because, and what's the time frame of the survey? When it's open now, or it's opening, and then when does it, how long is window?
So I'm still waiting to hear back, but I'm kind of, especially now, in daily communication with the survey contractors.
To see what,
But the first weekend of surveys will be this upcoming weekend for Memorial Day. But I'm not sure if it's going to be another month or a few weeks. I'm honestly still trying to get that answer.
yeah, and how many people are just literally, no pun intended, gearing up to get out on the mountain? And this weekend being graduation Mid-Valley, you know, we might have lower numbers on the trails, but as long as we have an adequate time frame to really gather the data, I think you're already working on, which is important.
Yep.
And I wanted to ask Pickens County staff, was Ian Long notified of this meeting by chance? We've been getting consistent letters.
Was who notified?
Ian Long. It's Ian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Ian.
mean, we're not, we get a lot of different people contacting us about e-bikes, and so we're not.
He seems to be the most consistent.
You guys get that. We get a lot.
And we forward it.
I'm happy to forward everything I get.
No, we're happy to forward you the stuff
No,
we
I know.
get, so.
But the reality is this is not a decision meeting. This was
Okay.
just an informational meeting.
So
He
we-
knows that this is happening.
Okay.
Everybody that I get an email from about it, I tell them that this is happening this summer. We're gonna help with our channels to make sure that people get the ability to do the survey. And so once it goes live, we're gonna help through our channels too, to make sure that people know about it. And so, to get as much feedback as possible for the BLM.
And I think that'd be a great link for the BoCC to have, so we can refer people right directly to the survey link. The other thing is we've had, Ian's been, and he's aware that our position has been, we need to be working with our partners with BLM so that we have consistency and continuity using these trails. Because you're right, people don't know when they're crossing over one county line, municipal line, federal line. And it's hard for people on the ground who work there to even know exactly where that line is. So it's great if we can have some uniformity, just like the closures for wildlife would be. So I think there's a lot of things we can be looking at as we move this forward. And thank you for being here with us today.
And and on those closure questions, we've worked with the BLM to, we have reiterated why we have a different closure than they do.
Right.
And so, I don't know, during this process, this is not a process to necessarily change that, but
May
we
bring to
can
light
keep on
some-
reiterating that.
Great, thanks.
Can I respond to just that?
Thank you.
Greg does have a question. Do you mind if
Oh,
Nancy
go ahead.
goes?
Go ahead.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Yeah, that was the other thing I wanted to mention. I think I spoke about this with you as well when I was in your office. It's disappointing, the BLM closure time, and I think that the impact on the elk, if there are any left who go up there, which is questionable, will be exacerbated by more bikes and more people. And so that's another reason why I'm concerned about this. The CPW doesn't agree with either of our opening times, either OST or PLM, but
Well, they
I
agree
know
with
they've
ours.
okayed it.
No,
But their recommendation was later. I know they've okayed it, but anyway, it's just another reason for me to be concerned about it. I think e-bikes are amazing, and I'm not opposed to e-bikes in general, but I don't see e-bikes on Finch Creek Road. It's not like a place where people go to ride their e-bikes. They obviously want to be on trails, not on the road. So I get that, and we'll see where this goes. But that is another concern of mine.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking, the survey to me is like, it's great to have that data, but it's, with all due respect, it's mountain bikers, surveying mountain bikers, whether they want to see more access for mountain biking. And so I'm not, and that 34% would be against it is telling. So I think it deserves a deeper view, a deeper investigation. The other thing I'd be interested in knowing is, since these trails have opened up and the Crown has become so popular, what has actually happened to elk and deer population up there? Is there a measurable change in the activity of wildlife up there, because the big concern, of course, is that we are possibly taking a lot of habitat offline. And it's great that we try to look out for calving season, whether we can't agree on when it should be open or closed. It's kind of frustrating, but I'm concerned just about generally what are we, is this helping the decimation of the elk population, or is it hindering that in some way? That's just a question I have. I don't expect you to answer it now, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. It's like, this is a big chunk of habitat we're bisecting in multiple ways. With bikes already, I'm not sure e-bikes will make it that much worse, but eventually they probably will.
I'd like to speak to that. It's the people who live in the Crystal Valley pretty much agree that the mountain bike trails have definitely fractured the Soper's herd. It's not called Soper's, it's called some avalanche maybe. And so they're the ones who, so now they live on right near Glacier, right, year round. Haven't they come down on that side as well? A bunch, and then they're on the Flying Dog Ranch and sometimes on Bill Fales Ranch year round now, and they don't really go up there like they used to. I mean, obviously CPW can speak to this more knowledgeably than I am. I'm just talking about my own experience, but pretty much they're living on the valley floors now, and they're not migrating up into the high country there like they used to. And there are a lot of people who think it's because of the mountain bike trails. I'm sure there are other things as well, but that is the opinion of the people who live that I interact with in the Crystal Valley.
Right, thanks.
Will the EA address that? Will it do a look back on how the current condition of use has affected prior conditions up there?
Yes, I'd like to add that the EA will have a wildlife impacts section, so that will likely include data on the herd and how that's evolved.
Great.
And
Right.
I'll also add that the map that we see right here of the crown, that's changed quite significantly, I would say, in the past 10 years since our 2015 RMP, where there used to be a lot of routes up there that were open to motorized and mechanized uses. So I think that's been the biggest change is taking a look at those routes, getting rid of redundant routes. And I would say there's been probably a net decrease of motorized routes. I'm not sure about mechanized, but a lot of those routes have been closed, and the closures have been holding pretty well. Some of them are still open to administrative uses for like the grazing permittee to go maintain a pond or maintain a fence line. But if we were to put the admin routes up on the crown, that would maybe be a little shocking to people, but these are all the routes that are open to the public. But those admin routes had previously been open for public use, which, could have had a lot more disturbance
That's
than what's
interesting.
existing right now.
Thanks.
Thank you, Patty.
Did Tom Cardamone's, was it the biodiversity study?
Mm-hmm.
He did not study quite deeply this area. And I know that the Forest Service did their elk study in there, so that might be good information to have on hand as part of this.
CPW did a
Was
elk
it
survey, hasn't
CPW?
been released yet.
That's what
The
CPW.
watershed biodiversity did not do specific points on this property.
They did it
They're
up the crystal.
What the watershed biodiversity initiative does is they've taken survey points around this area and they extrapolate that data, including all the CPW data that it has, and then creates high conservation areas like medium high, medium low, and non-conservation area status to the overall watershed.
So that would be good information to maybe be looking at as part of.
And the reality is what Alan said is true. When the Crown was initially looked at, if every single road was open to the public at the time, and it was a spaghetti mess up there. So I'm not saying that this was the answer to it, but it's a spaghetti mess, and by the BLM closing a lot of those roads, it's changed. There's not as much motorized going all over the place. It's kind of concentrated it a little bit more.
Great, thank you.
That's good to know.
And I was in a meeting recently with CPW, and I don't want to speak for them, but it's my recollection, and maybe Alan, you can
You need a mic.
verify.
She's
Oh.
coming.
That the seasonal closure here is working well, from what they said, and that the animals really spend their time here in the winter when they're expected to be, and then as the green up happens, they're really moving up to the higher elevations, which is why the seasonal closure is there and seems to be working well, I think. Is that
The seasonal
general-
closure has been,
I like the sound of
we've
that.
given them cameras to monitor. The thing is, the seasonal closure on open space is only on the Hooksburg side for all use. In the winter, equestrians and hikers can access the BLM, but no mechanized and no motorized. And so that's been the, overall, that's what we've been watching. But the closures have been working. We monitor Hooksburg all the time, and we just don't see that much, people breaking that. The Rio Grande's closed in that area, so there's not many people breaking that. So the seasonal closures been pretty good. There's another phenomena happening that Francie brought up, is the elk are staying on certain areas and not migrating through. That's a bigger question, and it's an interesting point. Who knows, with the wolves coming back, will that change things or exacerbate things? We just don't know. And so there's a lot of questions coming in the future. But I do, one thing Alan did do is they have met with CPW on this.
Right.
Other questions? All right, Gary, you'll keep us up to
Are you gonna
date.
come back to us? That's my only question. When are you coming
Yes,
back?
as they go through the public process, we'll see what their findings are. They're not gonna make a decision before we bring this back to you. And so you'll be able to weigh in on their decision. You'll be able to weigh in on, the question that's really gonna come back to you is, if the BLM wants to move forward with opening these mechanized routes to e-bikes, does Picken County want to open the Hooksburg and the Bullpen area? And that's the question. If
question, yeah.
it might not. I mean, it might not. You guys are more than welcome to make, if you feel like as a BoCC as a whole, you can make a comment on this, and so you can choose to do that as a BoCC in a whole. Obviously, individually, you can do that, but I will make sure that you guys are up to date on the BLM's process as they move forward. But, they're gonna go through this summer to collect data and then start to make recommendations. And you will definitely, both the Open Space Board and the BoCC will be brought back, yes, for future discussion.
Greg?
Just when you come back, can you bring CPW along, or at least have the latest, opinion set from them when you come back? I just think that would be useful, just to know what are those guys thinking. Sure. If they'll share that. Who knows if they will, but hopefully they will.
I think, we'll see. Usually CPW makes a comment one
Oh,
way or
right.
the other.
Yeah, just want
So,
to
yeah,
just include it. Great, thanks.
great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
For your
Nice to
time. Appreciate it.
So I went to that site. Is there a place to look for the comments? I couldn't find the
All
comments.
There's a PDF download, yeah.
Let's move on. We're running a little behind, but I'm sure we'll catch up, and we get to hear about our microgrid. And I forget what BESS stands for. Okay.
I saw it, I had it there, Francie, I'll get it to you.
Crafty
Storage
old chocolate-covered
system.
espresso bean.
Ellie, is that what's laying in the middle of the floor there? Is that one of your?
Oh, that looks like it. Yeah.
Just
Scoping
wanted to
report?
let everybody know there's a spare that's been sitting there.
Espresso bean.
Oh, no, I've already had my coffee, but thank you.
I'm in it for the chocolate. I know.
And the coffee kick.
Hi, GR.
Good afternoon, everyone.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I'm GR Fielding. I'm the Construction and Asset Director for Picken County. And I will make reference to Michael Port, who is sitting behind me a few times today, as he has been amazing support staff for this initiative. of
Should
the
we bring
counties.
him up now and embarrass him, or wait
No,
for
I think
later?
we're okay. So we're here to talk about the AABC, which is the Aspen Area Business Center. BESS, which is a battery energy storage system, which is a type of DER, or distributed energy resource, that the county has installed. The location is basically across Animal Shelter Road from the animal shelter and next to the Aspen Snow Dump. Today we'll go through a little bit of a quick version of the history, where we are with the project, what agreements that we have coming up on it, and some of the potential next phases. History, this initiative starts back immediately following the 2018 Lake Christine fire. In 2019 through 2020, an energy box study was done, including some work by RMH. That was done with a number of different partners, including the county and Holy Cross. In 2019, the board declared a climate emergency, which started bringing some of these projects further to the forefront. Through 2021, white paper was completed looking at geothermal heating and integrated microgrid. So then I got involved in 2022 to bring the project through the final feasibility study, and then we immediately parlayed that right into design in 2023. Did the entitlements and all of the things for that piece of the project, and went into construction last year in 2024. And that took up basically April through November was our meat of construction on the project. And then this past winter and spring, we have been finishing up the commissioning of the battery energy storage system portion of the project. And so right now we have that portion of the project is completed. To get there, we had a lot of different wells to go to fund this, and we've made multiple trips to each one of those wells. So I threw this slide in there basically to say, we have a lot of thanks to give to DOLA and the state for all of their support on the project. The airport contributed, the general fund has contributed, the REM fund has contributed, RAFTA has contributed, and Holy Cross has contributed to the project.
And maybe this is just on the capital piece of that, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So the other piece that is in here on the timeline is this whole project was started also from DOLA, from an Energy Challenge grant that basically funded from the results of the Lake Christine fire a feasibility that even started the white paper, and was pretty forward thinking across the state for that time. So there's even more behind how we got here than what's on the chart today. And just want to call out, a lot of this was from all of the partners listed here that have helped make it happen.
Thanks for that, Kara. So where we're at, we have a 1.5 megawatt BESS. So what does that mean? That means that this battery can be discharged or charged at a 1.5 megawatt rate. So that's pretty substantial. And so you can think of that if we had like a tank of water and a pipe coming out of it, the megawatt would be the size of the pipe that comes out of it. How fast can we push energy in and out? The tank is the megawatt hours, or how much actual do we have of that energy. And so right now that BESS is rated at 3.6 megawatt hours. And that'll degrade over time to about 2 megawatt hours over the curve on these things, just like your cell phone's battery degrades over time. This is a little bit longer of a timeline. We expect that degradation over like a 20-year time frame. But by no means at that 20-year time frame does that mean that this thing is obsolete. It still has 2 megawatt hours of capacity at that time. Right now, Holy Cross is in the process of installing different equipment to be able to form the microgrid. In fact, as I was sitting here, I was getting emails from Holy Cross about making some small tweaks to some of the existing equipment that is there, and they'll be out, I think it's next week, to do that. The actual microgridding of the battery is a piece of this that I don't think many people could contemplate what sort of timelines that we were dealing with. As an example, there's a piece of software that goes into the controllers for these things, and that's what talks to the main Holy Cross site in Glenwood. That is a 2.5-year timeline to design that software. And when you think about that in the context of how fast things in technology go, it's pretty eye-opening.
What is that photograph?
So on the right, that is the controller cabinet for the battery energy storage system. So that's the thing that talks to the computer programs that we can open up as operators of the battery and charge and discharge. It is also, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of sensors and computers in this system, and this is what it all talks to. So it's like a mini server room that sits out in the field there. On the left is the actual picture of the yard right after it was revegetated, and it looks pretty puny in this, but there's a 5-gallon serviceberry. There's actually 2 of them in this picture that were planted as part of the project.
Are they blooming?
When we ordered 5-gallon bushes, I didn't realize how small that they would be actually.
It's a good thing you're not in, marketing.
No, some things, Francie, I do take the pictures in the realm of marketing and making things look really good, and other ones that you just have to be a little bit more realistic with it.
It's actually a desert, but we're calling it revegetation.
This area is really interesting. We did do, you see the blanket down, we hand casted a bunch of wildflower seed. We did grass, the native grass seeds that from the grasses that are in the area. I don't have any hesitation saying in a few years there will be plenty of sagebrush back in through that area. We didn't take out too much of the sage there, just down valley. There's a lot more.
Takes years for sage.
And then there's also in that picture you can see what was a constant headache during the project when you're digging in the ground in this area of boulders. I think we took out about 10 times the amount of boulders than we were anticipating, and we were anticipating a bunch.
So why did you have to take them out? Isn't this on the surface?
Well,
for trenching or?
Underneath the surface here's a picture of the yard. So in the upper right hand corner you can see each one of those little concrete pads. I think they go down about 3.5 feet. So we had to excavate out to have those footers put in. And as you go down and you hit a boulder that is in the place of the footer, you have to remove the whole boulder. And then you have to import a material to backfill around that because you no longer have that material, that native material. And then you can see a couple very small conduits that are poking out of the ground. So for future phases of the project, if we wanted to put more containers, the conduits are already in. The footers as foundations are already in, so you would literally be able to place 2 more containers of batteries, pull wire, and all of the equipment is already there.
Awesome.
If we decided to fill out the whole yard, we would have to get another one of the white boxes that's in the lower picture here. That's called a PCS, which is basically an inverter for these things, then we would be able to have 3 rows for that.
It'd be 10 megawatt hours, roughly.
Roughly. I think we initially said we would like our capacity to be somewhere in the 8 megawatt hour range, but like up front we would be a little over 10 to start, and then that would degrade to in the 6-7 range.
And where would the megawatts be coming from? Because 8 is more than we put out at the solar site.
That's a good question. So this is on the Holy Cross grid as it sits right now, and 99% of the time this is just something that is a distributed energy resource on the grid. The microgrid portion of this comes in an emergency. And so in that emergency, what we're able to power are several of those public facilities in this neighborhood. And if the sun is shining, we can power that off of the solar farm near Woody Creek there. And we can island this microgrid out to that site. That site actually would need to be pared down probably a bit to operate this because it's a 5 megawatt facility. Does that answer your question, Francie?
Maybe, but I didn't understand it.
So this site, the energy that goes into the batteries is just it's power off of the grid.
Oh, okay. It's not directly from the solar.
It's not directly. There's
Okay.
not like a line that goes directly from the solar to this site.
So the
to
solar
just
goes to the
charge
grid,
these
the
up.
grid goes to the microgrid.
Unless the grid gets cut somehow, and then it does.
And
the
then,
solar
yeah,
would feed it.
once we're in an emergent situation, if the sun is shining, we are literally forming the microgrid so that our buildings and that facility are both in the same island.
And then you're dispersing what comes in from the solar to the appropriate place.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
And can Holy Cross take advantage of the power in that battery storage system whenever they need it?
That's a great question. And somewhere in here, what I do have is, as far as some of the things that we're working on, there's a lot more agreements that will be coming to the board. One of which will be something very similar to their Power Plus program, Power Plus Flex, I think is how they're marketing it right now. So we're looking to get this this facility onto the Power Plus Flex program. So there would be some revenue from that that would help pay for the operations and maintenance of the site. And that would be most of the use case for the battery energy storage system, like fingers crossed, because you're not hoping that we have a situation where the power goes out in the Upper Valley. And so that's part of the final agreements that I have on this slide.
Except to test it.
Yeah, and there will be times where we're looking to test this. That's right, as part of the commissioning. So that's part of the final agreements. We're working right now on some operational contracts. That's some of the assumptions that we went into the project that have changed over time. Will require us to also have some help operating the system. Just like any other battery, these things like to be charged and discharged over time to be exercised. They don't want to just sit. Maintenance contracts, this is a very niche thing. There's not many people just hanging out in the valley that do this sort of work. So we're working on those maintenance agreements, and because of our warranties in that, we're working on getting that hopefully with our vendor that supplied all of the equipment on the project.
Can I ask another question?
Yes. go ahead.
So if Holy Cross is drawing down on this when they need it at peak hours or whatever, is there a certain percent to which they don't go below?
Yeah, and so we can set that, and that's one of the pieces that we'll identify in that contract for the Power Plus Flex program. And so the charging cycles of the batteries, there's a certain amount of times where you don't that you want to draw it down very far. But for those sorts of events, that Holy Cross is going to be looking for that power. Generally, we're looking at probably drawing it down to 25 or 30% of its total storage, and then. Generally, we would keep it somewhere in that 50% range. So after the event, we would charge it back up to about that 50%. They give us the heads up of the event, so we would charge it up to like say 80 or 100%, and then draw it back down to that 30. And so then you literally just take that percentage of the amount that's there, and that's what they would pay for access to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Patty.
So help me with the hours. So it could supply, in case of emergency, about 8 hours of power.
Not the way that it's currently situated. Since we only did the first 2 battery storage containers, if we were pulling out at the full 1.5, like the full size of the pipe,
Right.
we only have 2.5 hours of power. The good news is that we have all of the facilities that are on this, generally from the county's standpoint and for RAFTA, all have legacy generators there. And so if we were to have some sort of emergent issue, we could say we'll power this facility, we'll take that off the grid with a generator. It's really critical to have these other facilities have additional redundancy, so we'll keep them running on the battery, and then once that battery is depleted, then we can move over to the generators.
Because, we got the initial DOLA as a response to Lake Christine, which would have been more than a 2-hour emergency. it would have been. And so that was one of the things that I think really inspired this, which I think is great. But I think people need to realize it's going to, until such time as, if ever, we're able to build out more capacity there, the impacts to providing power to the general public, et cetera, that are on Holy Cross the systems, or even the city of Aspen's, was going to be minimal. So that I think needs to be clear, because it's a, yeah, that gives me hope that in the future, at some point, we might be able to find those funds to grants or whatever to provide increased service out of this facility.
But this only serves, I think, the airport and ABC and Public Works, so it wouldn't do Aspen.
So
Well, but it helps, doesn't it help to balance out the needs for Holy Cross?
Yeah.
So when you look at a couple of the concepts that we're applying here, one is a microgrid, and so that is making sure that we have public facilities have additional resiliency.
Right.
To your point, Patty, one of the things that you see in that industry that I've learned since I got involved in this project is these distributed energy resources. For so long, we have our power grid is, getting power from very far away. And so you see those concentrations of power there. We don't have that here. And that was one of the big lessons learned. And so if anything, like, we should look at projects like this and try to figure out if there's other ways to have those distributed resources. And as technology changes, they might look a little different, but generally they're some sort of industrial utility-esque type of application.
I think the hope was to, with having the people, the airport, RAFTA, et cetera, that are involved in this, the microgrid, was to then lessen the impacts to the other providers. So that was kind of part of the broader picture. So that being said, another question, how do we, since there's a lot of energy produced by that computer bank in there, how do we heat and cool that?
So each one of those, no, that's not correct. Most of those boxes that you see there have their own HVAC system.
You can see it in the picture, actually.
Yes.
Their own
How,
what?
but how are they powered?
Heating and ventilation systems.
Right, but they're powered by electricity
Yes,
that comes from
off the grid, yes.
off the regular grid. So that is concerning if we're going to be using the microgrid during an emergency to fuel these other entities. It's going to have to be operating, which means it's going to be in need of heating and cooling. So it's it's interesting. And I know that HVAC systems for computer storage spaces, whatever they call them, takes a lot of heating and cooling.
So the good news is we have a pretty minimal heating load during the winter because it generates a lot of heat.
Right, that's true. It keeps itself warm.
Because we live in the climate that we do, and this isn't like a server room inside of a building, I don't think our cooling need is nearly the load that we are looking at for like other building projects right now.
I was thinking of what happened to ours last summer. Issues. So I just think that's part of the bigger picture.
So the heat doesn't just dissipate?
A lot of it can, yes,
okay.
especially
but
when
you
you need
still
it
have
to.
to have
It's
a
designed to do that when you need it to.
You still have to have a significant HVAC system, and at the times you really need it are the times when it's really,
Everybody else needs it.
yeah. So, but I think this is a way for us to at least have a backup supply if needed for certain entities, with the hopes of being able to broaden that.
Karen?
Yeah, and I just want to also, what GR was speaking to, what's originally visioned, this is the first step in a very creative vision, is that integrated energy thought process that is out there. So one of the things from, and GR chime in here, from the time we did the white paper in 2019, which feels like lifetimes ago in some ways, especially in this industry, to today, is, that first element was looking at, are we using all batteries to build out that integrated, distributed energy system? Now, separate from this project, we have the geothermal grant and are looking at that. So I think to your point, Patty, it's this battery alone is not going to do it, but also this, what we're working towards is also not just the battery solutions, as all the systems are evolving, is how can we be looking at geothermal and batteries and working with the grid to really be getting that concept of on those black sky, dark sky events, we have the energy that we need for really the evacuation purposes. That's what this is really about. What is the energy to support the grid that we need for evacuation, not about sustaining during long-term events.
Right, and I think one of the things we learned in our fears of Lake Christine, with that one last power line dangling in midair, literally, was the need for emergency responses, people on oxygen, and generators. So I have a generator at my house because I'm on oxygen. I don't, but if I did, which could be soon, how do I power that? And then you have to find a way to do that. But the generator systems are getting much more efficient, as we know. But so it's a bigger picture, but it's a step in trying to put those pieces of the puzzle together. And I have one last question for GR. You've said you've been to the well many times. Are you still thirsty?
You know, I can address that for sure, Patty.
Yes.
Well, no, you know, to be frank, the project has been, you know, has a timeline with our DOLA grant. That grant expires at the end of June. We're working with our last invoices on that. Some of those invoices we've been working on for years, and we don't know exactly what they are until we get them. I think we're good. But the more we learn about things like this, you know, I did put in a budget for a maintenance line item and a power line item and an operations line item that we hadn't gone out to RFP for yet. And so as we're getting those contracts back, there's going to be adjustments to budget. They're not going to be probably in the order of magnitude of this project, but there's always you know, adjustments to be made there. Also, the timeline of the project we thought was going to be you know, probably 2 years, and it's been closer to 5. And so as all things like that, the more they go on, the more costs that we have. As Holy Cross finally gets the software for the controllers for the microgrid, so all those computers will be installed in the next few weeks. But after that software isn't ready for a while, we're going to have to go back and recommission everything. So we'll figure out what the costs are there. Some of those things are supported in our existing contracts, some of them aren't. And
Not that we don't like seeing you.
Yeah.
Trust me, we do.
Great, thank you. Other questions for
Thanks,
GR
GR.
on the project?
Thank you.
Michael.
Just one,
Yeah, Greg.
you know, we talked about what if you had to drain the thing at full
Yes.
hose capacity.
Right.
But that's like planning for Christmas or Easter Sunday, right?
Yeah, that's good.
So, if the, you know, what's a more reasonable load that could be pulled off that thing? I'm just thinking, we're not using 1.5 megawatts to power these buildings, are we?
No, and you know, the more I've learned about energy use in this neighborhood, like the things that just absolutely blow me away. We have machines at Public Works that are the peak energy user, like one piece of machinery in fleet. And you can see it when we look at like our solar generation. I can also see the usage in real time out at that site. So we could probably go triple that time frame of hours pretty easily by saying, hey, could you guys not use the parts washer over this time frame?
Right,
and hey,
right.
we're gonna move like, take this offline over at the airport for the time
So
being.
efficiencies haven't even been built into that number yet.
Right. Yeah.
So that would make a huge
that's
difference.
literally just the worst case.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the other thing? One advantage of waiting before building the entire thing out is presumably the technology should get cheaper and better and higher capacity, we hope, over time. You know, that's the trend.
You know, parts of the costs have gone down. You're right. Other parts of the costs, like the containers and all of those sorts of things, have gone up pretty dramatically recently.
Well, probably due to tariffs more than the free market would have.
Yeah. With the technology advancing, there might be slicker solutions in the future. The thing that gets more difficult is on the technical side. You have to match the batteries
Right.
within a site. It's like you don't have different sized batteries in the same piece of electronic. It would be similar here. We would have to go and procure that same the size of battery of what the capacity is left in the existing batteries on site.
Right. So you've
and
got
that
to
gets
match
pretty
them.
tricky. Yeah.
Right. And then does the provider, the contractor who's providing this, talk about recycling batteries?
Well, hopefully we're not recycling this one for any time
while,
soon.
but-
So we haven't had that conversation in this context. As far as we've had conversations about like the industry at large, I know that recycling industry is like burgeoning right now, and there's new facilities coming online. I know that like there's one in Germany that is used as the example for the industry and I don't know if
It's like 97% efficient.
Yeah, it's something. It's pretty remarkable. I do know that they've looked at sites in the U.S. I don't know if they ended up starting any of those constructions under previous administration's legislation that was looking at those sorts of
Right.
solutions.
So there'll be a lot of
Yeah.
raw materials available if they can recycle.
Yes.
Yeah. Great, thanks. This is
All right,
fascinating.
any last bits? No?
Thanks,
I
Patty.
abandoned my flow of this, so I think we got it all in. Thank you.
One last question. Could you just set up like a little phone charger on a post out in front of it so people can go plug their phone in and get a charge off the thing?
If you,
You want Windex with that also?
Greg, we'll talk offline about how sort of subject of ancillary
amenities
ancillary
required.
power is at a site like this. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jan.
Sure.
Sorry we got you off track.
It's all good.
It's just a test.
You did well. Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks, Michael,
this
we
is
didn't even get to
exciting.
get you up here to embarrass you
progress.
already.
All right, let's move on. We're going to discuss policies coming out of the Pickens County Vision 2050 process. Looks like we have several people here. You can- Wherever you're comfortable. Yeah, no worries. Would folks like a 5-minute break?
I'll go fill my water if you do.
All right, we'll take a quick 5-minute break,
And
please.
Hannah Hunt.
All right, welcome back everyone to the Pickens County Board of County Commissioners work session on Tuesday, May 20th. We are going to hear what will be a riveting and exciting policy conversation related to the Pickens County Vision 2050 process and potential updates to our housing policies, as I understand it. So I'll turn it over to Kara.
Sure. Thank you, Kara Silbernagel, Deputy County Manager, with Suzanne Wolf, Ellen Sassano, and Hannah Hunt is online, as well as we have Brendel Group with us. So we've got quite the team here today to walk through this. So I will be setting the stage and then hand it over to the experts, thankfully. But just before we get started, this is something, for context, this is something that, quite frankly, the board has been grappling with for quite some time, and is exciting to be coming forward to you today. Really, the purpose of today's discussion is not to necessarily end with any decisions today or have a new policy as we walk out the door, but to give an update of what analysis we've been doing as part of Vision 2050 to be looking at how we might be revising the current land use policies as it relates to housing outside the UGB, and letting the board give some guardrails and some discussion there, as well as what we're looking to revising in the policy as we look through the comp plan process. So, next slide. Oh, those were hidden. No, you're good. We can skip. So I'll go through. There's a couple change states. You know, I remember a few years ago the board looked at the existing citizen housing policy, made some pieces, but continued to get stuck because it's really hard. This is the crux of our community's values about rural preservation, what makes Pickens County special, how well we've done with limiting sprawl, and then also really starting to look at how we look at meeting the housing needs. Over the past few years, we have some change states. So one, we've got the CJC recommendations. That is really the foundation that jump-started us reevaluating the existing policies. We're in the process of a comp plan update, which even per the state requirements has additional analysis that is really informative, and that's why we're glad Brendel Group is here. That is going to speak to what we've been finding through the comp plan process, what we've been finding with the analysis to date, and how we're looking at the recommendations that are coming forward of rethinking the policy aspects of it and giving an overview of that water and land use analysis that's really informative in this discussion. Next slide. So the CJC, Community Growth Advisory Committee, is really the launching pad that we're using in Vision 2050 as we look at revising the how the housing land use policies and how we look at housing across the county. To take a step back, when you all established the Community Growth Advisory Committee, it was really to look at growth. Most of those 10 months, most of those meetings and hours together, the group spent a lot of time identifying the values that they want, identifying how we manage growth, both as we think about growth and intensity in our community that is no longer aligned or maybe needs to evolve with the community values that we are holding dear and looking forward to as we think about 2050. That goes with the climate initiative that you all addressed, the values of looking at how we think about equity and affordability, and also maintaining this special place in our community. So throughout that process, the committee themselves said, this is all great, we've been doing a lot of work, but what we have not really touched on is that effort thinking about equity and affordability. And we want to talk, we know that's not within the whole scope of this work, but we want to and feel like it's a miss if we don't talk about affordable housing. And so they actually pulled a subgroup together and spent a day workshopping of what could recommendations be around affordable housing within the lens of all their other work that they've been doing. And so that is what was attached in your memo, Appendix E or J. You'd think I'd have it memorized by now. And they really came up with some very thoughtful, deliberative recommendations, and the number one was to say the type of housing that we do want while we're incentivizing smaller housing is that we want the affordable housing. That is what makes up the fabric of this community as we think about all of the values that we're looking for, that the growth we want is that more affordable and middle market housing, that we should be looking at policies in the land use code that creates that environment for maintaining that affordable, creating affordable housing, and ensuring the fabric of our community. So that is really the launching point that we've taken within Vision 2050, and the team has taken within the comp plan update to say, okay, if we're doing that, how do we look at our existing policies, and how do we look at all the other information we're getting to find a place to revise that meets this goal? So, what?
Suzanne,
Yes, thank you.
you ready?
Yeah, I'll hand it to Suzanne.
Oh, I thought I was up later. That's cool. We can do this. We're a
You could
team.
probably do this in your sleep.
So again, when we're talking about, oh,
Mike.
point at my mic.
I know, me too.
Like it's right there. So the Growth Committee recommended revisions that would enable and incentivize different types of affordable housing, values-driven, data-informed. We talk about that a lot when we come to you. There are 3 policies in the Land Use Code today that we're looking at as part of this work. One is the Citizen Housing Plan. That's the main one. You got all of these in your packet. That speaks to, we want to house people of all ages and sizes, and rental and sale, and covers all of those bases. And it's where we talk a lot about the urban growth boundary is where we're directing affordable housing. There are some exceptions to that where we might allow, might consider housing outside of the UGBs. But that citizen housing policy is what then leads into the regulations in the code, where we have zone districts for affordable housing that are only available to you if you're in the urban growth boundaries. So again, just to tie kind of the policy together with the regulation, this is the policy that laid the groundwork for then the regulation to follow. Along with that, there are infrastructure policies that impact the ability to have certain development outside of UGBs, and that's the rural development and logical extension of utilities policies. So we're looking at those policies within this lens of how would we consider, if we were to look beyond the UGBs, what opportunities might be there, and what would we need to change in those policies in order to allow for regulations to change as well.
Yeah. So as we start to look forward, we think about this is great. What are the values that can inform the changes to these policies? So if you might remember, I think it was maybe October when we were kicking off the comp plan, and we came to you as well as P&Z, and we started to talk about tensions as we think about these values. There are inherent tensions in long-held values that are already existing, and these are what's already existing in Pitkin County plans, whether it's the land use code or other policies that have been created. And this is also the same values that really came out of the Growth Advisory Committee of these are the things that we hold true and dear to our heart. And so it really is that rural preservation. How are we balancing that as we also look at supporting community housing, recognizing that is what builds that fabric of our community as we look forward, and then really thinking about equity and affordability. And how do we look at all those things and balance these values when we think about, again, Vision 2050, when we have this eye for the next 25 years in the community that we want to be building today to meet that in the future. So you can head to the next slide. And so, again, these all have tensions points, right? And a lot of this is how we can protect that rural character, how we can manage the growth of rural and wildlands while also supporting that affordability and equitability aspects of our community. And there are parts where this tension continues and will forever play out, but there's also what we're finding and what we're going to walk through is that there is a sweet spot. There is a spot that is we can do more than we've been doing today, but is also going to keep those values that we hold true to our community, on behalf of our community, that we can hold true as we look to the future. So with that, I think we hand it to, oh, this is me still. Okay, tag teaming it all. So we've hit on this, but what we really want to do is, as we start to think about, it's not about what is in the UGB or not. What we really have been looking through as we take these value-driven, data-informed, as we look at those recommendations, is how can we reframe the discussion? And so how do we start to look at, and you all, when we've come to you before, have said, what is that infrastructure? What's the water resources that would actually enable or limit housing in the rural areas? And so what we're really coming to today is start to reframe it more about what are enabling and limiting factors when we think about housing outside of traditional urban UGB areas. And so what are the land use patterns that we want as a community? How do those align with our values? And also, again, those practical factors of the infrastructure and water, and being really not only looking for, again, today as we think about those limitations, but also the future, and how can we be thinking about those elements that we can really take those levers within the land use code, take those levers within our policies to both enable more housing, but also maintain affordability too. As we know, we have aging infrastructure in our rural areas. In order to even keep some of that affordable, we might need to look at what can we do to enable more opportunities to keep those at affordable levels. And so that's how we really are wanting to shape it as we think about this next iteration, is what are those enabling and limiting factors as we think about policies for the future. This is still me.
Thanks, Kara. I can jump in. I wish that I could be there in person, but I am heavy with child, as they say. So
we're happy you're here.
But to just underscore what Kara has been saying, I think that the approach has been, we've been having this discussion that's really been about values. The work of the Vision 2050 is to bring in that data-informed piece. And we're doing that by looking at and considering these enabling and limiting factors, both from a land use pattern standpoint and then also from a water infrastructure and services standpoint, which is what we will dive into. But the, kind of broad brush across our county, part of our dynamic is that we are about 85% public lands, and of our 15% of private lands, about a quarter of those are held within conservation easements, which puts limitations on development. We have these strong commitments to protect our rural character, protect our commitments to protect the natural environment, which are strong held values and rightly so. And by nature of that, that means that development needs to consider steep slopes, hazards, wildlife, migration corridors, et cetera, that are constraining development both physically, just due to the natural geography and topography of our landscape. So we see that most of the private land is centered around valley floors, drainages. And part of this is just to frame up that when we think about land use patterns, because what we're talking about is such a small sliver of our total land area, decisions around what we do with our developable lands is all the more critical and all the more crucial. So as moving to that next slide, the way that we're thinking about this, the long range team have been evaluating and thinking about how do we understand what our both current land use patterns are and desired land use patterns are, and the policies that inform them. So this graphic that is up here is really a conceptual diagram of our county. and recognizing that our existing land use policies have really assumed this stark distinction between rural and rural and urban. But we recognize that the land use patterns function as much more of a continuum between, or a gradient between, what's rural and what's urban, with several zones in between. So just walking through this, so characteristics on the left of more remote areas are a stronger presence of natural environment. So direct proximity to public lands, open space, rural agricultural lands, wildlife habitat migration corridors, and then subsequently a weaker presence of the built environment. So limited to no development, backcountry conditions with limited amenities, limited or no services or infrastructure. And then as we move toward the right, toward more urban areas, there's a stronger presence of built environment, including more density and development, presence and access to utilities, infrastructure, transit, and community services, whereas the natural environment presence is less present in the urban areas, rightly so. So less ag lands, less open spaces, less presence of migration corridors. I think the other piece, though, too, to recognize is that our community, or those municipal centers, have been built around that proximity to adjacent to resort recreation, which is public land, ski and recreation activities occurring. So there's, a little bit of fluidity across this gradient. But the kind of point here is to recognize, as we're kind of thinking through our land use patterns, that this is certainly not just a distinct urban versus rural land use. As we've been working through a variety of different data analysis efforts related to the comprehensive plan, we recognize that our community infrastructure has really been built around both our land use policies and our community infrastructure, built to assume economic activity is really happening and occurring in urban areas. And another study that we've been doing, which we'll kind of speak to here, there's a quite a rigorous effort on this, but we'll kind of tease it a little bit here, but just that we're looking at and understanding the outsized impact of large residential homes and their associated intensities that are happening in rural areas. And so part of that is recognizing that that level of intensity and activity that's actually taking place in rural areas is not aligned with our desired land use patterns, desired community values, and values of rural character and preservation. So some challenges in terms of what's actually taking place in the rural parts of our county based on what we've already established as community values. And so the intent, broadly speaking, of our land use policy updates that are coming forward in the comprehensive plan is to better address where distinct uses are taking place in order to align land use patterns with our community values and subsequent infrastructure and services. The focus of this discussion is really about updates to policies that are taking place in more urban parts of our county, and more specifically, the location of affordable housing. And using the CGAC, the Growth Committee's criteria, again, around understanding affordable housing location in the right context of zoning, hazard mitigation, and sufficient infrastructure. And so to put a finer point on that, specifically the CGAC location criteria talked about housing when it occurs outside the UGB, although they supported also affordable housing both within and outside of the UGB. But considerations for expanding opportunities for affordable housing outside the UGB include access to infrastructure, water and sewer being kind of a key component of that. And as we are learning, and also we'll walk through that, Shelby will walk through from the water standpoint, that's a really key component to this land use pattern analysis. And then the second, proximity to transportation, and then avoidance of hazards and wildlife habitat. So this criteria is informing how we're thinking about and evaluating new land use pathways to support affordable housing that may take place outside of the existing UGBs. And with that, I think land use pathways, Suzanne, do you want to walk through
Yep, I got that one.
those?
Thanks, Hannah Hunt. So yeah, as I mentioned before, there are policies and regulations in the code today that do enable community housing. As I mentioned, we have affordable housing and affordable housing PUD zone districts in the code. They're for use in the UGBs only. The policy, the citizen housing policy, does speak to other opportunities for housing outside of UGBs, preservation of existing housing, CDUs, EDUs, job-related on-site rental units. You've seen that, sort of used recently with the Redstone Castle. And I think another thing that's not on that list, but we have a growth management exemption in the code for affordable housing. So we've always differentiated between, new residential development versus if it's new affordable housing residential development, it's exempt from growth management. But there are limitations because those policies and then the subsequent regulations do limit affordable housing and extension of utilities outside of the UGBs. So the intent obviously was really to direct that affordable housing of density within the UGB, and that there were opportunities for, I think of it as more one-off opportunities on a ranch to have deed-restricted housing for for employees or things like that. And preservation of existing housing, obviously the county has utilized through the mobile home parks, being able to take those through a subdivision process. The Hoagland Ranch property was existing housing that was free market, but had been used primarily as affordable housing, and that was able to be deed restricted. So, but really the tools in the code today, the policy and the regulations, are very restrictive to do anything outside of the UGB. So then next. So as we're looking to, revise those policies and think about this moving forward, the intent is still the same, to focus development in more urban areas where infrastructure and services can support that. So really where we're looking with all the new information we're getting for opportunities for affordable housing outside UGBs would fall into one of these categories. Densifying existing development, where you already have an existing subdivision that may have water service or sewer service, and there may be an opportunity to expand that to accommodate for more density within that area. New development, and that was spoken about by the CGAC, are there places where we could put small clusters of housing? Whatever that might look like, 2 to 5, whatever that could be, but are there opportunities for that? And then the other is leveraging the caretaker and employee dwelling units. We've talked a lot about our program today allows people to come through and get caretaker dwelling units. Our deed restrictions on those are not very restrictive, I guess, is maybe the best way to put that. So I think the theory for many years was if we let people create these units, hopefully some of them get used to house employees. But we don't have good data on that in recent time. I think once upon a time it was, what percentage? Do you remember?
I don't.
Maybe 20%, that we'd done, it's pretty low. And so I think really looking at that as, are there more opportunities there to encourage people to create those units, but to actually house local employees?
Did you have a question, Patty?
No, I was just looking closer at their graphics.
So the intention here is to, considering those different land use pathway opportunities that Suzanne described, what we've done is worked with Brendel Group on a specific water land use analysis to understand what opportunities there are from a water infrastructure standpoint. And some background is that we've been working with Brendel Group broadly on a Pitkin County water conditions report that will be a portion of the comprehensive plan. The scope of that is technical support for a county-wide water conditions report looking at both supply and demand, and then supporting policy recommendations that are going into the comprehensive plan related to water, a lot of water conservation policy direction that will then subsequently move into code adoption or implemented through code updates. That's kind of the big picture of what we're scoped with Brendel Group, but a portion what we're focusing on today is just looking at that water and land use, again, what's enabling or what's limiting from a water and services standpoint related to community housing outside of the UGB. So I'd like to introduce and pass this to Shelby of Brendel Group, who will walk through this piece with us.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Nice to meet you all. And I'm joining you from Fort Collins, Colorado, so just the other side of the state. And my background is as a land use planner. I lead our planning and engagement team. And so I've invited my colleague Zach to join as well. He's an engineer. So if you have any questions after we get through the slides, happy to entertain them. So a little bit about our approach before I get into some of the specific findings and outcomes. First of all, we sent a survey to water providers, all public water systems in the county. We didn't have tremendous response, but I would say that the responses that we received were representative of most of the recipients of public water in the county. So about 70% of the people that receive water from public water systems were covered by those survey results. From there, we married in state and local data. This includes looking at the publicly available water plans as well as plans that were sent to us via the survey. Colorado has a very robust decision support system that has GIS and other data available that we can put on maps. And then we married that with Pitkin County specific land use data at the parcel scale that we can synthesize up and interplay with some of the CDSS data. So we used all of this information to estimate both current water demands as well as project out future 2050 demands. And then this is helping to inform what we're calling considerations. These are considerations as it relates to policy and eventual code amendments as it relates to integrating that water and land use planning. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to start really big picture and start with the sources of supply. Then we'll get into the specific ways that people receive water in Pitkin County. We'll end up with a conversation on reliability and where to from here. So I know you all have received some water education recently, so hopefully this is maybe level 201 instead of 101, but feel free to chime in if you have questions as we go. So Pitkin County is in the Colorado River Basin. This is one of the largest watersheds in the state. And as you all likely know, the Colorado River Basin is over-allocated. And so this means that there's really more water allocated than is actually available. And so in wet years, normal years, this is not problematic. In dry years, periods of extended drought, it is a priority-based system. And so those with the most senior rights have the most priority to that water, and those who are more junior are more vulnerable to potential impacts. If you go to the next slide, just want to quickly explain the different ways folks get water in terms of the source. And so there are two primary sources in Colorado. You either have surface water, and that is connected to what we call tributary groundwater. And this includes the streams and the lakes and things that are fed from that surface water. Most of the water supply in Colorado is the surface water and connected tributary groundwater. We also have the deep groundwater. This is the non-tributary groundwater. It's in bedrock. It's not hydrologically connected to that surface water. In Colorado, it's important to note that all water is considered surface water and tributary unless it's otherwise defined. So we'll get into the nuance of that in a little bit more detail, but this is not a primary factor in Pitkin County. We're really talking primarily about surface water and tributary groundwater. So if you go to the next slide, as I just mentioned, 99%, so nearly all of Pitkin County's water comes from the surface and tributary groundwater sources. So this is the water that's in the county, this water is also exported out of the county via 3 Trans Mountain diversions. About 40% on average each year of this surface and tributary groundwater is exported out. About 65% of the water rights associated with these waters are absolute, meaning that they're pretty secure. The other type of water rights are conditional, and again, we'll be talking about reliability in a little bit here, and so you can consider the absolute water rights sort of the premier water rights, and the conditional ones have some conditions and they're less secure. So you go to the next slide. So we covered the sources of water. Now we're talking about water supply. And so there are 31 public water systems in the county that provide year-round service. They make up a very small portion of the county's land area, but they do provide coverage to most of the population, about 70%. In terms of the estimated current demand, we're estimating about 13,000 to 15,000 acre feet of water per year. This number probably doesn't mean much to you. It doesn't mean much to most folks. Maybe a number to put things in context for the average household in Pitkin County compared to the average state water user. Pitkin County gallons per capita per day, that's a common metric. GPCD, Pitkin County's in a 214 range, average water use per household compared to a state average of 164. So Pitkin County water users are generally well above state average in terms of how much water they're consuming. Those are data that we gathered from the water provider survey. As it relates back to the public water systems, I'll note that 28 of 31 are providing service outside of the UGBs, and so these are homeowners associations and other community water systems, not the municipal water providers that are outside. Almost all of them, nearly all of them, receive water from non-exempt tributary wells. I'll explain the non-exempt piece in a little bit. You might want to recall that the tributary piece are those wells that are connected to those surface water systems. And because of that, these types of wells and types of water providers, if you are going to initiate new development of a new public water system or expand that system, you're likely going to go through an augmentation plan process. I'll explain that in a minute as well. Just want to highlight that public water systems and this non-exempt piece are kind of go hand in hand. So next slide. Okay, so I talked about exempt wells, non-exempt wells, and explaining those in more detail. I'll start with exempt wells, and those are really intended for rural areas. They do require a permit. It's not that they're exempt from permits. They're exempt from a lot of the administrative requirements. And this includes augmentation plans, which I'll explain in a minute. These are intended for smaller use applications. So this could be a house, a small, property, etc. That's compared with non-exempt wells. These are the ones that are serving those larger public water systems. They are generally more complex. They're not exempt from that more administrative process and often require an augmentation plan, especially the new ones, in order to be permitted. So again, both types require a permit. The non-exempt ones are going to have more frequent monitoring. Exempt wells get the permit and then it's basically handed over. If you go to the next slide, a few examples of how these show up and sort of the distribution in Pitkin County. So your well composition is leaning well towards the exempt well piece of the slide. And so 62% of the wells in Pitkin County are exempt. And so these include a mix of wells that are on older subdivisions, the pre-1972 subdivisions where it's the well is really permitted for one single dwelling unit. They're not allowed to use that well water outside. These are also prevalent in some of the more rural portions where you have the 35-acre properties created by exemption. In this case, the permit might allow them to serve up to 3 single-family dwelling units and provide some limited irrigation and animal and livestock supplies. That's compared again to the non-exempt wells. We've talked about these. These are really more closely aligned with the public water systems or other large uses. And so there are some nuance of, if you have a residential property that doesn't comply with the exempt well requirements, then it falls in the non-exempt category. So moving on. I mentioned augmentation plans earlier. This is a very simplistic way of explaining augmentation plans, but basically, if you are a more junior water right holder, you're looking to have a junior water source, you basically need to guarantee and find water sort of to replace what's going to be taken out of that supply. And so you're going to look for supplies upstream, either lease it or purchase it, and it's literally putting water in the stream above the more senior users so that it'll eventually trickle down to the newer junior rates. So kind of a complex, very technical process to go through. It can be fairly lengthy in water court to get those approved. Okay, next slide. Let's go back to the wells. Again, we've talked about wells, and you have the exempt, non-exempt, over 2,000 well permits coming from that renewable tributary groundwater system. We talked about 70% of the population gets water from the public water systems. The remaining 30% are getting water directly from wells. Predominantly for domestic household uses. Some of the other uses include like commercial, industrial, etc. As I noted, 62% of the wells in Pitkin County are exempt. This is really reflective of the rural nature as well as when a lot of these wells were developed. This is higher than we see in a lot of other parts of the state, and it's just a really noteworthy takeaway as it relates to future development opportunities and potential. And again, we've estimated what that kind of amount of water supplied from the wells is per year. So I've primarily been talking about water availability and looking at, is the water physically and legally available? Yes, in many cases it is, but when we're talking about water management, we also want to have the conversation around water reliability, and is the water available when you need it? Is it high quality? Is it consistent, etc.? So moving into that, if you go to the next slide, as Hannah Hunt presented on sort of the land use spectrum, we also think about reliability on a spectrum. And so some characteristics of a less reliable water supply, these are things where you have one source. We're dependent on one well, and perhaps you have junior water rates, and so those are at risk to more senior rates. If you have a lot of complex augmentation plans, you may not have storage or interconnections, even high water loss, risk of shutoffs due to aging infrastructure. Those are all characteristics. It can put you in the less reliable bucket. Maybe one of those alone doesn't mean you're a highly unreliable system. But if you start having many of these characteristics, I think it's worth taking note as it relates to future reliability. On the reliable side of things, these are good things for water providers and water supply systems to have multiple sources, senior rights, adequate storage, interconnected systems, so that if you have wildfire and you need to pull from another source, you have those abilities to pivot and find other ways to be getting water to people. And then again, low water loss and other things that are associated with modern infrastructure. So I'll wrap up here and just note that as this then translates to land use, a lot of the characteristics associated with less reliable systems are also limiting factors for new development. So we talked about exempt wells. These are wells that require a permit, but beyond that permit, there's not a lot of assurance, there's not a lot of monitoring. And so if you're wholly reliant on exempt wells, in terms of reliability and future conditions, it's something to be really thinking about carefully. If you're looking to connect new development to a brand new public water system, absolutely that's doable. Those public water systems will need to go through the augmentation planning process. They will likely need to find a source via a non-exempt well. And so it's complex, time consuming, and might be burdensome to get that approved. So we shift closer to the enabling side of the spectrum. We're looking at existing public water systems. As I mentioned, junior systems or ones with junior water rights or systems with really complicated augmentation plans, or systems with aging infrastructure. Definitely some opportunities there. We heard through the survey, that there's interest in some of these aging systems of potentially having more support from the county and getting on top of some of these infrastructure challenges. And so I think that is an opportunity where the county could lean in and really start helping with the existing water systems to be higher performing so that they are more on the enabling side of things. And then on the far right are the systems that are pretty stable, dependent on the senior water rights, and have invested routinely in infrastructure maintenance. And so those are probably most enabling for new development. So as I mentioned earlier, we have some mapping of where the different water providers are in relation to the UGBs. There's not a direct correlation, and so we just wanted to highlight, that the water and the boundaries of the land use are not always perfectly aligned. I'll wrap up here, and I would imagine there's probably going to be some questions.
Okay. Did you have anything you want to add before we?
No,
Or you want to get through the presentation and then we can
No,
open
I think
up?
now's a good time to pause for questions for Shelby or anything, and then we'll move into findings and recommendations.
Okay, sounds good. Questions? Yeah, Greg.
Just to clarify, it sounded like existing water systems are about 2% of the county area, or 2% of a smaller percentage of just the non-public land. What was that percentage?
Of the total area.
Total area, so out of 1,000 square miles or whatever we are, I think that's what we are.
Yeah.
2%.
Yep.
So 20 square miles are actually on existing water systems.
Exactly. Yep.
If 85% of the 1,000 square miles is federal, 15% is private, 3.75% of that is conservation easement. If we get rid of impractical and steep and riparian areas that are probably off limits, we're down to somewhere just around that 2% is my guess, 2 to 7%.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty.
And we can certainly do some more GIS analysis on that. I think that would be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, it'd be actually to see what's even possible. The one thing that occurred to me as I was looking at all this, and I've got lots of other questions, but I just wanted to keep it to whenever we look at places outside the UGB to consider, which is certainly something we have to do. I also want to just have a little check-in about what's available for densifying inside the UGB, because I still think there are opportunities there. And so I just always want to have that as a comparison and, as part of every algorithm that we create around this. Thanks.
Other questions for Shelby?
Oh, I did have one.
Yeah,
The other one is, we talked about future demand. What are we projecting for future supply? As in climate change, drying conditions, are we calculating that into future supply?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. We are anticipating future supply to have stress. In terms of like wild swings, probably, we were looking at Trans Mountain diversions. Are there any projects that are going to be taking like significant amounts of water out of the county? Unlikely, no. How precipitation falls and is stored in the county as, snowpack shifts to rainfall, et cetera. The timing of water and the storage of water do become factors. So we're not necessarily forecasting like a decreased amount, but sort of when the water comes and sort of the availability of that water when you need it is why we're kind of leaning more into that reliability side of the spectrum versus just the availability.
Thanks.
Patty?
Yeah, I found the use of the term public interesting. I'm kind of interested in what, to me, public water supply is like municipal, like City of Aspen water supply, Basalt water supply. Not so much a subdivision that has, or like Woody Creek Trailer Park has their own water supply. A little different for me when we're talking about extension of infrastructure. I don't see Woody Creek, I mean, they're limited in their capacity to supply water just for themselves. I don't see them expanding to provide for another subdivision down the street. But so I found that kind of an interesting. I'm more interested to see what the capacity is for the existing, like Snowmass Water. What's their capacity now if we were to do a joint project or on the fringes of their urban growth boundary? Does Snowmass technically have a UGB? Because Basalt has a area of influence or something, right? So, yeah, they don't really have a set like UGB like the city does. So there's just some confusion with me with some of the uses of terms. But because I know we've looked at, say, housing, for example, at the Intercept lot, the park and ride, but there's no infrastructure there for water or for sewer. And the city has said we're not expanding. In the Sand District, they're not expanding to service because of the location and the complexity to get to that site. So those are kind of things I'm looking at. Or say if we were to do housing across from Lazy Glen and Highway 82, they're not serviced by Basalt Water and Sand, and I don't think Basalt Water and Sand, they didn't have any interest in expanding to Lazy Glen, let alone to a new. Those are kind of areas where I would like to see some information as to what our opportunities are to actually work with those entities like Snowmass Water and Sand, City of Aspen Water, the Aspen Consolidated Sand District, et cetera, to see if they have any interest in helping to provide infrastructures outside the UGBs or their areas of influence or 3 mile or 6 mile, whatever they're calling basalts. So I found that to be a little confusing to me. Can I ask questions outside of the water report, or do you want to wait for that?
We're going to go into more recommendations.
Because I had some definitions from your presentation, but I'll keep those intact for now. Thank you.
Maybe just to clarify briefly, Shelby, do you mind just describing what that public water system is and kind of where those are coming from? If you go back to that slide on the public water systems, which is number 28. That just might be helpful clarification for you, Patty.
Yeah, it is. I'll note that I find the terminology confusing as well. These are water systems that are regulated by the state, and so they're quality and reporting requirements, and so we're pulling from a database. The sort of behind the numbers here, there are different types of community water systems. And so you're right, some of these are the large public, like municipal water providers. And then a number of them are community water systems that are HOAs, et cetera. And then there are actually 50 water systems in Pitkin County. 31 provide year-round service, but so like the 19 are like campgrounds and others that are sort of not captured here. So the ownership is separate from the word public. So where as a planner, I hear the word public and I think of like, is it publicly owned? In this case, think of public as who it's providing service to, and it's providing service to a community of people.
Yeah,
but it doesn't necessarily
I understand
matter
that. Yeah, it's just a very different picture for me, having been involved with lots of the creations of these metro districts, et cetera, over the years, and where they provide water and where their boundaries are is much different than, say, the cities. Did you just throw something at me? The city's metro district.
It's the whole triphone.
And either that, you can get that chocolate coffee bean off the.
Yeah, I'll climb over.
So
and get
anyway,
one.
thank you, Kelly.
And if I may, Shelby, when we did the survey of the water providers, was there a question about their interest in or capacity for expansion? There was a question, I don't know what sort of response
Yes.
we got.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see
We
if
asked
that's follow-up.
questions about current as well as future, kind of demand, supply, infrastructure, financial means, et cetera. I think many of them were saying sort of current conditions, generally okay. A number of them, like half of them said future infrastructure was insufficient or somewhat sufficient. So there's some, concerns about infrastructure, financial means. It was about 40% that said it was somewhat sufficient or insufficient financial means. I need to pull up the data specifically about future supply. I think it goes hand in hand with those, about nearly a half of them are saying, and it really goes pretty closely with whether they have the senior rights or more junior rights. If they're not expected to grow and they're just serving their current service areas, I think 9 out of 10 said their current supply is fine. So it's just a matter of if there are existing or additional pressures, really working closely with those water providers to understand which ones have capacity and not. And so we do have those detailed survey results. We committed to not sharing those results for each water provider publicly, but the county staff does have that.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Shelby. I'm wondering when augmentation plans were initially implemented.
That's a great question. I don't know. Zach, did you have that in your engineering training?
I did not. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's been,
Like
I think,
what
several
year?
decades at least.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, this is interesting. I would love to see some of that more detailed data relative to the individual systems, kind of status and water rights conditions.
And as Hannah Hunt said, what you have, where we are right now is we have the preliminary water conditions report. This was just to give a high-level overview as it relates to housing. We anticipate as this is completed with a draft comp plan, we can give a more detailed on the water aspect as well as it relates to the comp plan.
And I'll just comment, I've said this before, y'all have heard me, but Greg sort of brought it up relative to the demand versus the supply. And some of what I struggle with relative to these tributary supplies is it only talks about how the water got into that supply, not what it does when you pull it out, because they're connected, by definition, they're connected. And, that is always problematic for me with how these policies are currently established when that connection causes impacts elsewhere in the system. We don't have any tools to manage that. So just something that I always keep in mind. All right. Other questions on the water stuff, and we'll keep moving. All right, let's keep moving. We're going to keep moving on key findings, and then if we have additional questions on the other parts of the presentation, we'll make sure to get them. And we're clearly running over, and we're going to keep running over, but hopefully I'll try to get us caught up.
Can I do a time check? Because we do have a few more, but we can accelerate and leave time for discussion, so.
Yeah, I think we want to be done by 3:45 to allow for our Healthy Rivers interview. I don't think prep for the joint meeting will take 30 minutes. And do board members have a chance to run over? I think we should be done by 4:30, but is that okay?
I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we will keep going. So building off of what Hannah Hunt was presenting on the land use patterns and on Shelby and the water pieces, moving into what are we seeing as those key findings and considerations as we look at recommendations for revising those land use policies. And really what we're looking at is how are they, again, we've hit on this, we'll continue, aligning with the competing land use, competing community values, that really those CJC recommendations are the foundation for what can the land use code do and be revised for incentivizing in the right places affordable housing as appropriate. How do we factor in those practical limitations for the development? And Patty, to your point too, this is really focusing, we're not throwing out any of the good work that is already in there. There still is a strong preference for development within the UGB. These key findings and considerations are really looking within that segment of how does development look outside the UGB, still making sure that that preference is really within those UGBs, within the urban areas. And so then what are those policy revisions to enable affordable housing, and how do we think about that as we look at water service districts as really being that most enabling and limiting factor?
Now, is that a public water service district?
We'll say public and community water systems.
See, yeah, that's the key point right there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So recommendations to enable community housing as we think about what are the land use pathways. So as we've been going through our work throughout, a lot of what Hannah Hunt and the long range team has been doing has been looking at, from all the analysis, what are those pathways to enable housing outside the UGB, and how does that align and fit within the recommendations of the CJC? So with that, I will hand it over to Hannah Hunt to dive into the details.
Thanks, Kara. Yeah, so the next two slides are really to bring together the synthesis between the land use patterns, location criteria, guided by the CGAC, and then that water element. So I want to walk through these two, and we can come back when we get into discussion, but just to describe what we are, kind of how this is informing the policy direction ultimately is our aim, but just to bring you into that process. So this is talking about the limiting and enabling factors for housing outside the UGB, again, densifying existing and new development. So looking at those two together. And the consideration here is, where is this most suitable to occur? We know that and the CGAC does say, here are ways we want to support housing within the UGBs. However, we also think we should explore opportunities outside. So this is looking at opportunities outside the UGB, which is looking at areas in this, what we're calling transition zone, which is in the yellow. And the factors that make this location most enabling is that proximity to urban areas, because it has access to infrastructure, specifically water and sewer, the opportunity to connect to existing water providers, and as Shelby mentioned, especially those with additional capacity, and generally that is well-resourced, larger providers closer to municipalities, and those that have identified opportunities for infrastructure upgrades. In addition, this already has proximity transportation and transit and avoids hazardous areas and wildlife habitat. I think, again, as Shelby noted, there's not a clean line between what our current UGB is and the water service provider boundaries. So that's where this makes sense to look at what are areas that may be outside actually of the UGB, but meet this location criteria to be able to enable that type of either densifying existing or new development. And then on the limiting side, we're recognizing that least suitable for this type of densifying or new development are rural or remote areas, because there is limited or absent infrastructure. So there's more reliance on wells, which we know less reliable water supply. And the new service providers, the opportunity for any new or larger service provider or non-exempt wells. Again, while that's technically feasible, it's really unlikely due to high cost administrative process, identifying supply in these more rural areas. Additionally, limited access to transportation and a much higher presence of hazards and wildlife habitat. So this basically is saying, so opportunities to densify existing development or new development for affordable housing outside the UGB would be most suitable in this transition zone, kind of as per those characteristics above.
Can I ask a question?
And then the next one, this next slide is talking
Greg
about
has a question
CD.
real quick. Sorry, go ahead.
Hannah Hunt, thank you. That's really fascinating, and it makes sense to me that one of the criteria I think I'm assuming is part of this is proximity to transportation is great, but I also know that we actually have. It seems like we have jobs that are outside the UGB. You know, whether it's the hospitals or the schools or even ski areas. How about proximity of housing to the jobs as well as to the transportation? If you can avoid a long transit or transportation and can walk to the job or to the school or the whatever, it just seems that that might be another little key we can insert there that might help us make decisions regarding proximity. Transit's great, but if you don't need transit, even better.
Yeah, and Greg, kind of going back to that beginning when we were talking about our kind of existing and desired land use patterns, a lot of that was saying like our infrastructure and community services are set up, assuming that, that we are supporting economic activity that's more focused in urban areas. So our transit system is set up to support that type of proximity to job centers.
Right. Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
So kind of connecting the dots there, but yes, it's a part of that with that transportation and transit access. So then the CDU, caretaker and employee dwelling units. So this is looking at where is this most suitable to occur. And again, this is looking at location in transition and rural areas where likely either they already exist or they're added to existing residential development. So enabling to this location is access to infrastructure, again, specifically water and sewer, similar to new and the densifying existing development. This is connecting to existing providers, continues to be the most enabling. For well users, consideration here is that well permits must allow for an additional dwelling. And if you're on an exempt well, this could be enabling if it does not exceed the service capacity. We can kind of get back to that if we need to. But additionally, proximity to transportation, part of this is that it's utilizing existing access of primary residences, and generally avoids hazard and wildlife as a primary residence is already located. On the limiting side of why we're looking at remote areas as not being suitable for this type of land use pattern for community housing is that limited or absent infrastructure. From a water standpoint, require heavy reliance on wells. That exempt wells there's opportunity for exempt wells to exceed pumping capacity, and also thinking about the increased concentration of wells could present some water reliability issues. And we looked at kind of that map that Shelby was sharing about where those wells are currently located, and looking at kind of where that density of wells close to each other could present some water reliability concerns. In these locations too, in these remote areas, the opportunity for new service providers is generally a non-starter because of cost and time and supply limitations. And again, limited access to transportation, higher presence of hazards and wildlife habitat. So again, kind of in sum, the opportunities to leverage CDUs and EDUs for community housing outside the UGB, most suited to the locations that would be these rural or transition zones, again, per the characteristics that are around infrastructure, transportation, and hazards considerations.
Hey, Hannah Hunt, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry, Francie has a question.
Hi, Hannah Hunt. I have a question about CDUs and EDUs. So if you have an exempt well permit and you have a single family residence Do you have to go to the state engineer to add a CDU onto that well, or is it generally covered?
I'll take it.
Okay.
If you're on a household-only well, one household, the CDU is a dwelling unit for the state, and so your well permit has to allow for 2 dwellings, not just one. So a lot of those exempt wells, if it's one household use only, it does not accommodate for a caretaker dwelling unit. So they would have to go through water court augmentation to serve a CDU.
But when you applied for your well, you knew you were building a CDU, then would your well probably be approved for both?
I can't answer that. I mean, the only way if your well permit allows for, if it was a 35-acre exempt well permit allows for 3 dwelling units, you have the ability to have a caretaker unit on that well on your property. But it depends. Your well, you have to see what your well permit allows.
But I thought that exempt wells sometimes accommodated up to 2 to 3 dwellings.
Sometimes yes, but a lot of them is just one household.
Okay.
What if they're
So one
attached?
dwelling. My understanding is it's still seen as a separate, as a second dwelling.
Because it is a separate entrance.
I don't know that the state, again, it is seen as a second dwelling unit, whether it's attached or detached. That's
So
my
that could be a
understanding.
pretty significant impediment for people choosing to do a CDU.
Right, which when people come to us to ask, it's one of the first things we always say if they're on a well is make sure you know what your well permit says.
And I think just to bring that back to, again, this is like what are enabling and what are limiting factors. Like that piece on a CDU, the well permit is something that really needs to be considered. That's like the first step to see what's, to see how that might be feasible. And Shelby, it looks like you're gonna chime in too.
Yeah, I just wanted to connect a few more dots as it relates to a point I made earlier just about the average gallons per capita per day, and just the well permits for exempt wells are assuming 15 gallons per minute pumping capacity, and that's really not checked. And so it is feasible that some scenarios of existing development, and then if you start adding CDUs, exceed that capacity. So even if it's permitted, you could run into some reliability issues, as Hannah mentioned, if you get a concentration of these exempt wells in a similar place without those return flows, as we were talking about. If you have dwelling units that are kind of over consuming beyond their permitted limits.
And maybe just on the point too of while the wells for enabling CDUs, EDUs still might be a big impediment across the county, one of the things as we go into this discussion is there still may be opportunities that we don't know about. And so really where we're looking in these land use policies is just to create that policy and that framework to enable the opportunities that might be there, even if it's 2 or 5 or 10, we want to enable those because we think that they are the right fit rather than not trying to make the change at all.
And if I may add, Greg, so the CDUs, assuming water is available for them, also may provide an opportunity for some housing in closer proximity to employment that's not in the urban areas. Just something else to consider.
Thanks. I'm slightly off, I don't know if it's tangential, but we did receive a letter about STRs in the rural areas in CDUs that may not, do we look at well permit criteria when we're looking at increased use of STRs in a CDU?
CDUs are not allowed for STRs, and with an STR, I mean, again, the residence, when the residence is built, you have to demonstrate that you have water for that. An STR we treat it as it's a residential use. It's not designated as commercial in our realm. So as long as their permit allows for that residence, whether that's occupied by the owners or occupied as an STR, we're not looking at it differently.
Okay, thank you for that.
But we limit the STR use to the size of the permitted residence,
Mm-hmm.
not more.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. We have,
Great stuff.
yeah, it is.
Okay. So I think we've already sort of hit on this, the three policies we would be looking to revise based on those growth committee guide recommendations, what we've just been talking about, the enabling, limiting analysis, aligning the land use patterns. These would be updated in the comprehensive plan. And I think, as I said, we need the policies in the comp plan that then helps guide us for what the actual regulations say. And right now, just to point out, the policies live in the land use code in chapter 1 of the land use code. Once we've adopted the comprehensive plan, that's going to replace where those policies live in the land use code today. The comprehensive plan will be the location of the county's policies, land use as well as, otherwise. So, and that those policies would be updated to reflect the things we've been talking about: access to infrastructure, proximity to transportation, avoiding hazards, and habitat areas.
Comment?
You don't get any questions. We skipped that slide. No.
You can't shut us up, don't worry.
My definitions.
Yeah, Patty has some questions. I think Greg may have had some additional ones
I
as
went
well.
through all the policies and made notes. I think we're gonna maybe need to have another discussion if you want more input on the policies rather than, but that's
Yeah.
the side note.
Can I just maybe just some framing for this? So where we are, just so you are aware, so we wanted to come to you all first and foremost because this is a big shift in policy changes that has been long held. So the purpose of today is to get some feedback from all of you, kind of understand the guardrails that we're working in and how we've been thinking about it, and are we thinking about it correctly? This then will roll into the comp plan. This will be, I'm sure, discussed at a very both high level and detailed level when we kick off the comp plan draft in July, as well as then for community engagement and then when it comes back for adoption. So this is the first of many times you all are going to see it. We just knew the emphasis and where the board has been on this, that we wanted to have that check-in first of, are we thinking about it right? What are the right things? And so if through the discussion we need to come back, absolutely can. But just wanted to frame up that this is the beginning of many more to
Well,
come.
because, I probably have more than 15 minutes of comments for myself. But that being said, just to go to definitions, what define middle housing, middle parentheses, market housing, and middle economy? I use middle 3 times, and I'm in the middle of confusion.
Yes. And I would so that was really from the growth committee's report where they used affordable and middle, kind of this concept of, I guess, people that work here can afford the jobs and the salaries here can afford to live here. As we've worked in, and I know even in Ashley's work, we have shied away from using that term middle economy because it is gray. So
Thank
just
you.
know that is really coming from the growth committee's recommendations.
Just my thing. And I had one other definition. You used the term, we are now understanding and quantifying the outsized impacts. Outsized? I don't know how, I was thinking outside, maybe it was a typo, but it's outsized.
Hannah Hunt, you want to take that one?
I can jump into that. Yeah. And if you want to go back to that, I think that's on slide earlier on when we were talking about maybe 16 or 17.
It's
But
on
so
page 3 of your
part of the
AIS,
analysis
so.
that we're also doing, Patty, is looking at the impacts of large residential development in rural parts of the county. Part of that Shelby alluded to is that there's a lot of our per capita water use is much higher than other parts of the state. So there's an intensive aspect from a water standpoint. When we look at that to a lot of these rural residences, we're looking at that through a variety of different lenses. That's an analysis that's not a part of this discussion, but I would say we are recognizing the climate, transportation, economic impact that these larger homes in rural parts of the county have that are outsized. That's correct, or
like
disproportionately large to the square footage that they are.
I think she's disproportionately
associated
large.
Yeah,
might
so
be the
it's
phrase
large
to
impacts of
define
large
outsized.
scale.
Where we wouldn't anticipate it
All right, well, let's see if Patty's done, and then we'll go Francie and then
I'm
Greg.
done.
Okay,
I'll
Francie.
skip my other stuff.
I'm a little concerned about roadblocks that HOAs may throw at this, given the power of HOAs in Colorado, and wondering if you've looked at that.
So I think that we know that there are going to be roadblocks within HOAs or other areas where, again, we are in this stage is we've set up a land use code and land use policies that never even really open the door, right, to even have those conversations. And so where we are right now is how can we revise the land use policies, put those policies in place in a comp plan that sets the stage for code changes to even open the door for some of those conversations. And so there will be roadblocks along the way. This is not going to vastly open up the door across all of the county, but it's an effort that what we can control and what the county has a realm over is in that land use code to make those opportunities in the future.
Okay, I would say that HOAs have an outsized amount of power in Colorado.
That being said, though, one of the pieces that has come out of this analysis, but also came through the growth committee, is while HOAs do, there are also HOAs, neighborhoods, as you're aware, where their infrastructure is aging and they're looking for ways to keep it affordable.
That's true.
One of the ways to keep it affordable might be looking at how they might bring in a little bit more density. And we don't allow, our land use code doesn't provide that opportunity. Whether or not they want to pursue it is up to them. What's up to us is, do you want to make that an opportunity or not?
Great. Good answer.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
I think
Love
they
it.
just want to come to us.
Greg.
Just want to say thank you. I noticed you mentioned wildlife habitat considerations. It's on my list, the issues, habitat considerations. I was reminded of the BLM mountain bike discussion. It's like we want to expand e-bikes into an area that's already, perhaps been impacted. The habitat has been decimated or impacted to some extent, and we're seeing that throughout the county and the whole area. And so habitat is a big concern, and I just want to thank you for including it. We talked about water use pretty clearly. I'm thinking also, something else to think about is we like to think of ourselves as rural, and we do a lot of work to preserve rural and conservation. So view planes have got to factor somehow, and I guess they probably do. We just didn't talk about them. That was really all I had, but this is really great, and I support the direction you're going, and I'm nervous about what you're going to find out.
Jeffrey.
Great work, though, guys. Just great.
Any other questions or comments as our planning expert on the commission?
I'm uncomfortable that we're moving forward and sort of ignoring the Aspen Area Community Plan, I guess. And so the Aspen Area Community Plan.
The what community plan?
The Aspen Area
Oh, thank you.
Community Plan of 2000 and 2012 establishes the urban growth boundary. And so to me, this is sort of putting that to the side. And I think I think the considerations for affordable multifamily housing require additional roads, sidewalks, sewer, water, access to electrons or electricity, fire response, emergency response, hospital and schools. So I think just looking at water is undersizing the frame at which we need to consider sprawl. And to me, the Aspen Area Community Plan identifies a UGB that has not been fully developed. And so specifically the, let me just give you acres. So, sorry, City of Aspen's 2,420 acres. The area within the UGB is approximately 4860. And again, the Aspen Area Community Plan describes that area that has been determined appropriate for urbanization and or is likely to become part of the City of Aspen. So I'm more fixated on the density and then the density within the 3-mile state planning area than I would be about encouraging sprawl when there's a lot other, there's quite a few other lenses to look at growth outside the UGB in terms of services that need to be provided. With respect to HOAs or metro districts, I would say if you have an aging and fragile metro district or HOA, you're less likely to pull another PVC pipe and tap than you would be to say, nope, no more users, sorry, we're done, until that infrastructure is replaced. So I'd say actually the opportunity for ADUs or CDUs is probably the biggest challenge to metro districts and HOAs outside the UGB, again, because of that aging infrastructure. So I'm also, I'm concerned that the survey was only sort of 10 of the 30 or 10 of the 50. And I would assume that if you kept that survey open, you would see aging infrastructure and cost hurdles in terms of expanding metro districts and HOAs. So,
Yeah.
Sorry if that was a long-winded answer.
Great.
That's good.
Yes, Patty.
Since I had a lot of comments on the 3 recommendations, the appendix you attached, is there a possibility we could at some point soon, I'm looking at the 2 scheduled agendas, to have you come back if you need I think it's worthy of discussion from the board as to how we want to maintain or tweak or whatever these policies moving forward. I don't think we really have the opportunity maybe today to put in the time and energy to give you our comments.
We didn't wear you down.
What's that?
We wore you down? Is that what you're saying?
No. Reading this was interesting, and it gave me cause to make a lot of notes.
No, I agree. I'd love a second stab at it, and if there's a way to share the slides, that would be super helpful. I'm wondering how you conceive of dealing with this element in our joint meeting with P&Z on June 17th.
July.
Really? That is
July 22nd.
June. That's
June
the
17th?
June P&Z. So is P&Z only
Oh,
the
got it.
joint
Okay.
is
Got it.
in July. I can tell you that we are thinking about it. We have not gotten as far as thinking about all the. There's a lot to cover in that kickoff, and so we're still in the process of.
Well, so I think maybe we should do some offline consideration about bringing this back to us for another hour conversation prior to that joint meeting, so we're not sort of fumbling through our own thoughts while we're jointly meeting with them after they've had a chance to jointly fumble through their own thoughts, is what I would suggest, and I'll make sure we find time.
And maybe one process check-in. So we are planning on, I might be getting this wrong, the June 4th and June 17th meetings, sorry, not the June 4th, the June 17th meetings, we are bringing this housing and water discussion to P&Z on June 17th. So it may be good to, we can work with the chair and vice chair about coming back to you all with P&Z comments for helping drafting.
Great. Sound good?
Yeah.
Greg.
Kelly.
I just want to read what I said earlier, just to make sure. I think it'd be really valuable. This may help motivate us and incentivize us to redouble our efforts to find ways to densify within the UGB. And I think when it's presented to the community, perhaps there'll be more energy toward doing that. And so I really want to make sure that's part of the discussion.
And Kelly, can I?
Yes, Francie and then Patty.
How closely does this align with the recommendations of the coalition?
The Citizens Advisory Group?
Yeah, the advisory group.
This basically takes those recommendations and looks at how it would look like in the land use code. So those are the foundation of it all.
And I think I've asked this question, and you've probably answered it a bunch, but how much more developable land do we have in the UGBs or the areas of influence that are solely in unincorporated Pickens County?
We can get that number. I can tell you that as staff has been evaluating this, what we have seen, looking at the criteria that's placed on, so just so you all know, and we can find a way to bring it forward to all of you, is that when we look at water, access to transportation, we looked at various buffers, you still are finding most predominantly the majority is within those the UGB, the area influence.
Most of the developable.
Yes, yeah. That actual percentage we can look at and bring back in the
No,
future.
I'd just like to see, how much brain damage we're doing for how much land we could do it on.
Cindy actually gave us that information before
Yeah,
she
I think
left.
it's somewhere, but things have changed, and since the 2012 Aspen Area Community Plan, things have definitely changed.
It was
So-
in one of those reports, for our retreat when Cindy, it was in that.
Yeah,
like
I'm
in
saying they probably
21
have it, but
maybe.
I think it should be part of
it's
this
part of your
discussion, so we know
first
what we're talking. Are we talking massive opportunities, or are we talking very limited opportunities? That may help influence us in one direction or the other. We need to think wisely about the limited property and how we can best utilize it. If we have lots of space out there that we could build on, that I think would frame things a little differently. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you good? I'd like to wrap things up.
Yes. Thank you all. I
Thank
know
you
this
all.
was the beginning of many
Thanks,
more.
Hannah. Good
It's
luck.
very enlightening.
Yes. This is the product of many hours of conversations over many years.
Yes.
Good luck, Hannah Hunt.
And we
Don't know when we'll see you
encourage
next.
babies coming to meetings, so no problem.
Yes, bring babies to meetings.
I'm gonna take a step out. Is that okay, Kel?
Yes.
She's glowing, it must be
I
soon.
saw Sam here. He was out in the lobby.
Okay, well, let's do our citizen interview. I'm sorry I've worked us through our break. We'll take one after.
That was
talk
great, though.
with
That was
Sam.
important, necessary to
Yes.
stay focused.
We're moving to the Sam Cox thing.
Yes.
Is he online?
Okay, I'm out.
Okay, we'll text you. Okay.
He's actually in the room. Sam was a kayaking buddy of mine 30 years ago.
Oh, fun.
I
Okay.
think that what I just took away from that is there really is an awful lot of opportunity left to build a lot of stuff. It's just, that was really surprising.
Hi.
I'm Charlotte today.
Hi, Charlotte.
Okay. Well, you
Nice hair. I like you
can
changed your hair.
remind us where we're at with the recruitment process.
A lot more chlorine in the water in Carbondale.
Oh, I like that look.
All right, so we are going to conduct our interview for the Healthy Rivers and Streams board position. Hello, sir.
Hey,
We're
Sam.
going to have,
Okay.
so the way we will conduct this is Lisa will remind us where we're at in the recruitment process and any requirements for this board appointment that we must keep in mind. Then Mr. Cox will invite you to tell us why you're interested and any connection you have to the board, the Healthy Rivers Board and/or its work. And then we'll kind of just go around the table and ask our questions.
Okay.
Patty, I think, just stepped out to either take a quick call. She'll be right back.
Okay.
Francie has recused herself because a family member has also applied for this, so she will
Oh,
not be selecting the.
Should I wait for Patty to come back or no?
I don't think so. You can
Okay.
get started.
Okay.
And, yeah.
So, I started kayaking in 1974. I was a river guide starting in
Sam, hang
70.
on,
Let's
one
hold that
sec.
for 2
Yeah,
seconds.
sorry.
We're just
I
gonna
like
have
that
Lisa.
he's like out of the chute.
I know.
It's
That's
great.
it, yeah, he's
I love
ready
it.
to go.
Enthusiasm
Can
is
you say
awesome.
I can tell you?
we're gonna have Lisa sort of remind us of
Yeah,
the
let me just
appointment.
give you
She'll
the
tee it up.
yeah, just
Appointment
for the
Patty's
public
coming
too,
back,
because
too.
yeah, I'm Lisa Tasker with the Picken County Healthy Rivers Program. I'm actually here for Charlotte Anderson today because she is under the weather, unfortunately for her. Yes, and so I wanted to remind everybody that this is there's a recent resignation on our board, and that was a Roaring Fork watershed position. And we have 2 Roaring Fork watershed-wide positions and 5 Pitkin County positions that cover the 5 different districts, if possible, commissioner districts. And today, Sam is here applying for that position. And also Charlotte is going to be, she wanted me to let you know that she's going to be gathering links to all of the interviews that have happened. So we've had 4 so far. We had one on April 8th, one on April 15th, and one on May 6th, and one on May 14th, just to remind you guys. And she's going to be gathering those links and share with you guys so that anyone who was not here and was out of town and did not see the interviews can go ahead and review them for a decision. And then she's going to add the decision making to the next Tuesday's board view notes so that you can let folks know about the decision. But yeah, so we're here today with Sam Cox, and he is in Pitkin County. And he and I actually worked on the ski patrol together. I guess it was probably around 39 and 42 years ago, I think. So, you know, we were, none of us is
We
getting.
don't look that old, do
No,
we?
no, it's not, it ain't happening,
Impossible.
right? So just a little tidbit. But anyway, so I'm here to introduce Sam to you all today. Welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, Sam, welcome. And
Thanks,
please,
Kelly.
we'd love to hear about your interests.
Do I need to do anything with the
The
microphone?
light should be red.
Okay.
Yeah, red on.
Okay, it is red. It's just bright in here. Yeah, so I started kayaking and rafting in the 70s, and first locally here for rafting companies, and then working for Colorado Outward Bound in Canyonlands and Dinosaur National Park, and Canyonlands National Park and Dinosaur National Monument. I did that off and on for a dozen years while ski patrolling at Snowmass. In the mid-'80s, I went to grad school and got an MPA. I took a water policy course as part of my studies. I was able to combine my term paper in that course with work for the Colorado River Outfitters Association, producing a cost-benefit analysis of hydropower generation versus recreational uses. And lo and behold, this was in Glenwood Springs. Together with the CROA and Western River Guides Association and the tourist services in Glenwood, tourist committees in Glenwood, we stopped that dam. I've been fortunate to run the Grand Canyon 11 times, and I've kayaked in 7 countries. Healthy rivers have been a major part of my adult life, and I would be honored to serve on the board.
Wonderful, thank you. Questions for Sam? Patty?
Yeah, let's see, Sam. So you guys were patrolling years ago. I think I've known Sam for over 40-something years. And I never had any idea you had such an amazing resume behind you.
Oh, thanks.
I thought
And
you
that I
were
was
just
still
one
a
of those
ski
guys,
bum,
ski
even
bum.
despite the resume.
So sorry, I do apologize for that, but your resume and your educational background and your experience with water is pretty amazing. I just have one question for you. Do you have time to commit to this board?
I'm pretty sure I do.
Okay.
Being fully retired, between the Election Commission and this board, I think those are the only commitments I have.
Other than skiing, kayaking, river.
Mountain biking, right, yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thanks, Sam. It's good to have you here, and
Thanks,
thanks
Patty.
for taking the time to apply.
Thank you.
I was just trying to calculate the number of days you've spent in the Grand Canyon, which is probably approaching 200 plus.
Yeah, I guess it must be.
I've only got 6 trips. All of a sudden I'm envious.
Well, it doesn't get any easier down there.
No,
so you
I'm
better
sure
go
it
soon.
won't. It'll hurt more.
Right.
I really appreciate you signing up for this because I do know about your passion for rivers, having run some rivers around here with you. I guess questions are, what about things like, water use is such an important thing, and we talk about beavers a lot, and I'm just wondering, what do you know about natural systems? And, if beavers built a dam across your favorite kayak run, what's your inclination?
A stick of dynamite? I don't know.
Yeah.
Wrong answer.
Wrong answer. Where's the
No,
button?
that's for avalanches, not for beavers.
Well, fortunately, I haven't had to worry about it. The beavers don't seem to build dams where
Across whitewater.
where I go.
Not
Right,
really. Yeah,
right.
it's only still water they do that.
Right.
For the most part. Well, it's great having you here. I really appreciate hearing what you had to say. I learned something new also, as well as Patty. When you're on the river, you never reveal all this stuff.
Right, right.
You're so modest.
Thanks,
you.
Greg.
No idea.
We used to have the North Star Preserve to ourselves as kayakers until the paddleboarders took it over. And as kayakers, we only wanted to paddle up there the first 3 or 4 days of our career. And
then it
They
was
keep
over.
going back over and over again, creating this huge problem.
That's right.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. Nice to meet you. Yeah,
Hi.
I'm curious. As you may or may not know, the Healthy Rivers Board has a fund that's a taxpayer small percentage of a sales tax, and so every year they prioritize projects to work on and ways to use that fund. And I'm wondering what priorities stand out for you personally for watershed health in the Roaring Fork watershed.
Well, I try to stay in touch with what's going on. It sounds like Roger Marolt's problem up there at Lincoln Creek, they've finally decided that that's okay. Certainly, we'd love to keep water from going over the or through the Continental Divide if we could, but I guess that's kind of written in stone most years. It was interesting at the Amacaucus the other day, Francie said, well, I'm trying to be the best John Ely that I can. And that's right, you were there as well. And she talked about the fact that when there are, what's it called, cameo calls, the cameo diversion dam in Tibet Canyon, that we actually win. We actually get ahead because the cameo calls are senior to the ones up here, the diversion to the western front range. So, yeah, I guess I'm a little. I don't have a lot of priorities that I'm bringing to the committee with me. Other
Keep the
than
water in the rivers again.
Yeah, keep the water in the
That's a great
rivers, keep it
start.
flowing, keep it clean.
Yeah, great.
Right.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
Jeffrey, do you have any questions for Sam?
I just have one. E-bikes on the Crown. No. It's funny when I meet with Gary Tannenbaum, he always goes back to Edward Abbey. So I guess my question for you is, favorite book on water, and or beavers.
Right. I read Cadillac Desert, but I think I preferred a story that stands like a dam to that, and of course Emerald Mile is every river runner's favorite. And to take just another moment or two of your time, you mentioned e-bikes on the Crown. I just got back from Bentonville, Arkansas.
Yeah.
And we biked there for 7 days, and even the young ones have e-bikes there. They're allowed on all the trails, and they have 250 miles of trails. Maybe that's part of the reason it doesn't seem to be a problem. But all of their riding is hub-based, where you ride a green trail up to the hub, and then you have 8 different choices for downhill runs. And so they run the e-bike so they can get up there quicker and do another downhill run.
Did you get to see Moshe Safdie while you were there?
Did we what?
Did you get to Crystal Bridges?
Yes, yeah, the art museum. Yeah, it's great. And the, but that's.
Do they have water there?
They do seem to have quite a bit of water there. Crystal Bridges the art museum is built over a waterway. Yeah, it's cool.
Pretty cool. I didn't know about that.
All right. Any other questions for Sam?
Thank you for the Walmart plug.
All right. As Lisa said, we are going to
Thanks for coming in, Sam.
discuss and make a decision, and Charlotte will keep you posted.
Okay.
All
I
right,
won't hold my
thank you.
breath.
Oh,
Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
Hey, where do you live in the county? Where are you?
I am on West Cypress Creek Road.
Oh, okay, great.
You've been out there for a while.
Since '07. Yeah.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Time flies, right? Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Good
you all.
to see
Thanks
you.
for all the
Thank
good
you.
work you do.
Thank you.
Bet.
All right, gang. We skipped over our break. Would folks like a break? Otherwise, we have prep for City of Aspen meeting, which sort of rolls into future agendas and open discussion. What is
5
the
minutes
preference?
stretch, please.
5 minutes
Stretch, yeah, okay, we can do
Okay.
that.
Well, how about 4:05? We'll come back. Thank you. Okay, welcome back everyone to the Picken County Board of County Commissioners work session on Tuesday, May 20th. We have 3 items remaining for today. Our preparation for our joint meeting with the City of Aspen, our review of our future agenda calendars, and open discussion. I spoke with Mayor Rachel Richards about possible topics for our joint meeting, and I thought I'd share that with you, and then we can see what lands and what doesn't. And I have to say, I called Patty this morning
Going,
because
"Help me, I'm going
I'm like,
crazy."
am I going crazy? I really had a memory that we had wanted to have a robust wildfire conversation for our spring meeting. And yet when I went back and I listened to our conversations about it and then went back and listened to our joint meeting with the city, we didn't revisit that. So I'm like, maybe just Tori and I had that conversation and did not get consensus from our boards. However, it is a topic that is of interest to Rachel and I, and maybe for the rest of the board as well. And so some of what she and I discussed was whether we can get some presentation relative to wildfire risk and mitigation planning happening for this summer, a better understanding and presentation from our emergency manager in the fire district on evacuation information. And that was one topic. Another topic was about housing partnerships and with our new tax, what we're thinking of there, and maybe what opportunities we might see in collaboration with the city. And then Rachel is, and I don't know if I forget if she has already brought this to her board for consensus, but is really interested in a broader housing summit, planning a broader community housing summit in the future, and would like our enthusiasm and participation in that. And so some interest in that and whether that is sort of a thing we start brainstorming around at this next meeting. When I went back and I listened to our conversation again from late January in preparation for our February meeting, another topic that we have brought up was coordinating with the city about bicycle safety up to the bells and collaboration with our local bike shops on that. And I mentioned that to her, and she said that they could be interested in that, and we might need to see if that's ripe to pull together in the next 2 weeks. So those are kind of 3 topics. One is a carryover, and then wildfire and housing stuff.
Okay.
Patty?
I think wildfire should definitely, not just for our benefit to understand what the city's evacuation planning is, but to collaborate in that. And I think the sooner the better. I'd rather know how to evacuate before the fire than after the fire. And I'd rather the public, and it's a good opportunity for us to get out with the media and to get it out on grassroots with our discussion with the city. And I think staff, between stuff we've already done and discussions we've already had about wildfire and evacuation between emergency managers and the fire district, I think we should be able to pull something together in time for the meeting in 2 weeks. I think that would be a great topic. I'm going to just go through the ones, Kelly. The housing partnerships, yeah, I think they're interested, and I think they need to know that we have a very limited amount of money, and most of it is to put money. We've already talked about $3 million out of that coming out possibly for partnerships. Well, one for the good deeds, and then the possibility of helping out with other purchases. But I think that they may need to know what we're thinking, and what we need to know what they're thinking. I would like to have a discussion with them about a housing summit to see if the whole board is, their council is interested in that, what that means. I don't want to go to another housing summit where we go through what we already know. I'd like to go to a housing summit where, okay, this is what we already know. What are we going to do with it? I've sat through too many housing summits identifying we have a problem. We know we have a problem. We need to come up with some ways and some discussions as to what we're all thinking and how we can at least chip away at solving it.
Didn't we just have a housing summit 2 years ago at the Dozier place with all that good food that they serve?
Yes, we did.
It was right after I had surgery, actually, so it must have been 3 years.
Is it that long ago?
Yeah, I think so. I would like to get an update on where the lumberyard is, instead of just a sort of monolithic idea out there. But I'd like them, if we're going to talk about housing, I mean, how can we not talk about the lumberyard?
So do you have any specifics about the lumber?
I just want to know where they are
It's
at
designed,
with it.
it's under contract, it's being dug, it's
Well,
dug.
that's what I haven't heard, so I'd like to hear, rather than from you. So,
To do the excavation, well, I'm not gonna.
Tony, I'm not, please, don't shout out from the,
Sorry, I don't mind doing that, but it's.
and wildfire, I mean, they've told us that the evacuation plans depend totally on what the emergency is. So I don't really want to put them on the spot again. You know, I mean, we've asked them quite a few times, and they're not specific. And we can ask them again. I just feel like, I don't know. It's fine. If we ask them, fine. We talked about it at the
And to do mitigation plans.
Emma Caucus the other day, and Scott, is that his name? From
Thompson.
Edge Bell. It was interesting. He spoke, and I'm happy to hear more fire things. I don't know.
okay, let's go to Greg.
But excuse me, but while we're on the fire things, I think it would be nice to have an update on, from somebody, I don't know who. Let me think about who. Maybe Jennifer, or maybe the River District, on the status of our rivers and our watersheds and our soil moisture content, because they're pretty connected. And so if we could find a way to tie that in, I think that would be helpful. Not quite sure who that would be, but it could be somebody from the River District, could be Brendan or somebody from the River District.
Or the fire districts, I think they know.
Or the fire
all
district,
that.
yeah.
Angie may
Yeah.
know that already.
I heard on the radio yesterday that we've dropped from 57% to 38%, but that was before the
we got
last
snow?
24 hours. Yeah.
Greg,
Okay, regarding fire, I think it would be,
is your mic on?
let me turn my mic on. Regarding fire, I think it'd be great if we're going to talk about fire, let's have the fire district range manager here, whether it's the
Right.
fire chief or whomever, to really talk about, because I'm not convinced of the practical information we're getting. If they're saying, oh my God, it's going to take 13 hours to evacuate the entire town down to the last soul here, it's like, that's a very unlikely scenario. I want to talk to somebody who's practical about what would really happen. Because if there's a cataclysm coming up the valley, we're not going to be heading down valley anyway. So I don't think that is a practical scenario, and it certainly is used very well to scare people.
Yeah, and it doesn't even include using Independence Pass.
Well, so there's some things, and also the fire manager I talked to said there's a lot of people would probably be sheltering in place very logically. So to throw that out, that we have to evacuate the entire population, and it's going to take 13 hours, and that's a reason to do X, Y, and Z, to me is like, we need to drill down, and I think their engineer should have better information than that. And
It could be
so I'm
something else
skeptical.
though, Greg, like
I don't-
some kind of chemical spill.
Well,
or,
it could be, yeah, it could be a number of things, right? But I think that's like a great way of terrifying people, and so I want to drill down on it so it's not such a scary thing. So having the district guys come and talk about it would make a lot of sense. Regarding housing, I think a housing conversation would be great. I would love to find out what their level of support is and what's their level of enthusiasm for the housing authority and the buy downs, the Western Region Mountain Housing Coalition and the buy downs. I think that's when they say they have the buy-down apps to solve a lot of our immediate housing needs, and they've already got a price tag on it, it'd be nice to see how committed the city is to moving in that direction. I'd also love to talk to them regarding housing just how about densifying in the UGB? What does that mean? And, have they identified places where they could densify within the city and the UGB? Because that's an obvious scenario for utilities, transit, all the other water, all the things we talk about. Lumberyard, it'd be great to hear more about what's happening there. So I think housing's great, fire evacuation's great. And then there's that Roaring Fork River, protections of the Roaring Fork River and keeping water flowing in the river is an interesting conversation. And we've been so focused on protecting the Roaring Fork, I guess just a conversation about that with them would be really valuable to me, especially through Aspen. The Roaring Fork through Aspen has kind of been the priority. We want to make sure it's protected and preserved, and I want to make sure the city is thinking the same way we are, or at least we know what they're thinking.
Can we have that conversation at an open meeting?
I think we can. That's
We'd have to ask
public
Rod,
knowledge.
but
It doesn't
that's
have to include.
That's a meeting in itself.
Well, if we're doing just catch up, I guess that's enough for 3 meetings. That's a summit.
Can I,
Thank you.
but Greg, your position about the density, I think when we're talking housing and partnerships and UGB, I think, and water, I think it would be of interest to know, what kind of water capacity do you have within your water service district in the city for density?
Well, clearly.
Right, clearly.
Because they're already making us cut back on water use in high water usage times. This year, we're probably gonna hear even
At your
more about
house?
that. We will be. We've been in the past about watering every other day or every 3
no
days.
kidding.
Every even days.
And
or
they're
odd
talking about it now?
I don't know, but I have a feeling
Will
it'll
be
come back
soon.
this year.
I think you're right. Patty makes a very good point.
So, and that, if you're gonna be building more density and hooking it to a water supply that's already breaching capacity, what are we talking about?
Well, hence this morning.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think a water conversation at some point with the city, water in general and what we're doing and what we're seeing it would be a good meeting in itself. Oh, and one other
Got
real quick
enough
thing. And if we do a housing summit, we're talking housing, and we're talking UGB issues or areas, zones of influence, we should have basalt maybe at the table too.
I like
in
that.
the future.
I like that.
And
Well,
snowmass.
And snowmass, yeah.
That would be fun, all of
bigger
us.
than a.
Now that they passed the draw site.
What else we're talking about here? We just changed it.
In a shale draw.
Okay.
Are you gonna say anything?
If the chair allows.
Would
sure.
you like to? Please.
So I've got 3. Prince and I both went to the Public Lands and Water Summit, where I think the content was pretty good. It was sort of a repeat of what we heard from the U.S. Forest Service, but also included BLM and CPW. So I think there's an overall, and Rachel and John Doyle were there, so maybe we've touched on it. We don't need that. So one was Public Lands and what does summer 2025 look like. The second was, no one's used the T word, taxes. So is the city planning on anything on the ballot in 2025? So special districts.
You mean ballot,
et
you're
cetera.
talking ballot questions?
About elections 2025.
Yeah, in the next 2 years even.
And then the other joint piece, I'd love to hear what's actually going on at our state.
At the state level?
Yeah, so we have not heard from either Caitlin or Velasco, and well,
Is that with
never.
the city meeting?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I'm assuming they haven't heard from Caitlin or Velasco either. So it would be an opportunity to have fresh content, not something like housing that we've discussed for years. Just those were my 3.
Yeah, I think knowing the ballot questions, they probably want to know ours too. Any special districts, and that could be, we could have like maybe Kelly a slot where we did these little snippets rather than lengthy discussions.
But even
with Caitlin and
yeah.
Velasco, that's to me is a whole nother, because they need to be brought up to speed on.
But even
Caitlin
again,
Velasco is.
Opening up the Healthy Rivers conversation, CC conversation, all the other conversations with the city jointly.
Are you gonna be at that meeting? It's on June 3rd.
I will be CCIing, unless you have it at lunch hour.
Because it says
And that
Because
Woodruff
you
not
won't be at
attending?
our meetings as well.
It's 4 to 6. He'll be at CCI.
So.
But those are good subjects for you guys to explore.
Thanks very much for thinking about it.
I will watch it on the YouTube.
You'll be in Keystone, is that
Keystone,
where it
I
is?
think, yeah.
Okay, so what I think is that our staffs can get together and handle a conversation about housing to include an update on the lumberyard, partnerships such as the city's interaction with the Regional Housing Coalition, and opportunities to possibly I don't know if densify is a word. I haven't bought into that yet.
Sounds good to me.
Made it up.
Densify.
Possibly a summit, and if possible, a presentation about their water ability for additional housing. That might.
And the only thing I didn't hear was the wildfire and evacuation.
Well,
plan.
no, I'm just focused on housing, because
Oh,
what I think is that between the county and city staff, we can pull that portion together. It sounds like for wildfire, there's some requests to pull in third-party presenters from the fire district or the wildfire collaborative to cover
And to drill down on their
risk evaluation, evacuation planning, and mitigation efforts.
I think Chris could help, our emergency manager can help with that.
I didn't get to say, but just so you're aware, John and Pete are meeting this Friday following both of the boards, so they can discuss pulling all the right partners together for the topics that you all said. Pete Stryker.
He's the
He's the
interim.
interim. Jeffrey.
Just to add color, one of the things again that we heard, Francie and I heard at the Emma Caucus, I thought that was helpful. Rather than evacuation, it was more focused on alerts and alert levels, and it was a combination of the sheriff's department and the fire department, and given sort of the decline in the snowpack, what does the summer look like? It was much more targeted than it's 13 hours to leave town.
Yeah.
And so it might be nice to sway that conversation back to something more tangible, summer 25, than rehashing an evacuation conversation about the entrance.
That sounds more,
Bless you.
yeah.
Again, from a community standpoint, I think what Emma took away was, what does a red alert mean? What does this level mean? How are we, working at the state level with NOAA in terms of water pack and humidity in order to trigger that alert? And then what does that mean for a fire ring standpoint? And so to me, that was very a good use of the community's time.
Yeah, but we need to remind the people in Emma to sign up for their alerts. Yeah.
May I ask for
Huge problem.
clarification?
Yes,
So
Kara.
on the housing partnerships, I heard you say staff getting together, bringing updates on opportunities, updates on the lumberyard, the coalition. I would anticipate perhaps even Phillips. Do you all? What I'm unclear of is the staff prep for the housing summit, or that's just the two bodies discussing the concept together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I think yes, that
Are they interested in
staff
doing it?
isn't going to build an outline of a potential housing
thank you.
summit. We will have that conversation as boards of our interests and what we might want to see, which would direct staff to then
Thank
go
you
off
for
and
that
do
clarification.
things. Okay. Is that all right? We'll check with Rachel and see how that goes, how that
And
lands.
when
Yes.
we're talking the wildfire, if we do just a simple explanation of what their thinking is for evacuations, fine. But I also think, and Greg, this is up your alley, is mitigation efforts that people can be doing now. And how we can get people within the city who don't think they need to mitigate, they do. Look at what happened in California.
Well, Red Mountain, perfect example. Yeah.
Okay. Sound good? All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
How long is that meeting? Half an hour?
2 hours. Are we hosting? It's on Tuesday.
We
so
are
we're
hosting.
Okay. All right, let's look through future agendas. All right. Do you want to go first, Kara, or do you want me to go?
I
Or
do
board
not have
members to go?
any items
Okay.
for future agenda.
So one of the things we talked about in our last week's agenda prep meeting with Jeffrey and I and staff is relative to the Board of Social No, not the Board of Social Services. The meeting, the discussion immediately following the Board of Social Services relative to food security efforts in the Valley. And I wanted to check in with you all to gauge board's interest on whether to give time to those partners to present, or well, maybe not partners, stakeholders, groups, organizations, on whether, I imagine they would probably, if they're going to come, they'd probably like to address the board, but I want to manage that conversation according to the board's interest and
So
priorities.
who you,
I'd support that, certainly.
you think you'd having Lift Up come again because
And,
they didn't get the RFP?
Not because they didn't get the RFP, to let us know what they're doing. And then also the other one, Harvest for Hunger, and who else is there? Food Bank of the Rockies could possibly be here
That's
as
like
well.
a whole day.
Well, this is why I'm checking in, because right now we have 45 minutes slated for it. I am going to wager a guess that they will be either in the room or online. And, you know, do we want to invite them to speak to us for 5 minutes, or, you know, be available to answer our questions? I could use some help in trying to tee up that meeting so it goes well. Jeffrey, and then I'll go to Kara.
I would just add that I would really like to know the current food landscape. So specifically, we're probably done with appropriations at that point and cuts to SNAP and everything else. So maybe that's in the food security efforts, but I'd really like to know what we're facing at the federal level in terms of cuts to services before we open up the door to the local. Just hearing the local nonprofits without understanding what's the risk at the federal level, I just want to make sure we get both the bottom up, and here's what the services we provide, but here's top down, here's what's at risk right now.
Yeah,
I think it would be nice to reset that.
Yeah.
A report from our own staff about what grants are at risk.
I'm reading about SNAP every day.
Right,
SNAP's,
sure. I think that's a
yeah,
good
so-
idea. They could
So I'd love
preface
that
it.
top down before we just sit there and say, well,
That would be Levi, right?
No, I mean, I think Sam and Lindsay could cover, like, this is the landscape that we're in right now. These are the providers trying to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And then whether we want to hear from them directly, you know, would be the next thing to.
I'd support hearing from a short presentation from each and every one of
They
them,
know
however
anything by
many there
next
are.
Tuesday.
Would be great.
5 minutes? Yeah,
I just
Kara?
think it's important for them to have FaceTime with the board.
Sure.
And just maybe some context setting. So the intention is staff is pulling together, per the board's direction and based on the last conversation, exactly that. What is the landscape of food security and who's working in this space? And so they are pulling together at a regional level all the work that's being done. So not just the partners of Greg that you mentioned, but also bringing in how are the CSAs interfacing there. So the two routes. So the whole intention is really to be more at that 30,000 foot level of here's the whole space. And we intentionally wanted to do, let's bring all of that in. And then if the board wants to invite for further discussion from specific stakeholders at a future meeting, I think that is where we were just trying to set the stage. I think to Kelly's question is, we anticipate that there will be stakeholders there. Do you want to invite them into comment as we speak to the whole landscape that staff is presenting on, rather than specifics to, you know, them giving presentations? I think that would be at a future meeting based on board direction.
Our landscape, certainly important, and I think in terms of what federal grants have gone. You know, that's the important thing. Like, we know the CSAs and the farms, we get great to have a report from what all's available in the valley, but understanding what money's not flowing in from the federal level, I think, is a great way to tee that up, and that should be part of that.
Well, I think that's what Kara said would be the presentation from our staff. It's just that 45 minutes is not going to cover presentations from, you know, the Hunger for Harvest and Two Roots, and that may be a future discussion where they can come in and say, this gives us some groundwork as to what questions we might have. I think it'd be great if they were here or online, so if we did have a specific, but if we want to plan for presentations, we're going to need more than 45 minutes. would be my gut feeling.
Do we have a time slot for this already? Is that why we're
Next
talking about a
Tuesday.
specific amount of time?
Yeah.
I still would love to get a strategic view, like look at the landscape as opposed to this is what, he provides Kellogg's and she provides something else. Like, I don't know if that's as important. We're not doing an RFP.
What I'm saying is let's get that groundwork and then decide from there if we want to bring them back at a future date. Because we want more specific as to what your program's doing, what your program's, we also have to remember this is a busy time of year for the CSAs because this is when they're cranking it up for the season.
Well, we commissioned studies. We've paid Human Services, John Doherty's company, to do studies on the food landscape, as I understand it.
So what is
It'd be nice
coming
to understand
before
what's
you?
coming from that.
Yeah, what is coming before you is essentially that strategic view. It's not about which partner is in which space. It is about what is food insecurity in the region, who are the types of providers that are filling those gaps, and what gaps are still remaining. So the intention is not to be specific about who's providing Kellogg's versus Cheerios, to use that. But just an overview. And then the prior conversation, as staff understood it, was then if the board wants to know more about from specific providers, you could provide that direction to staff for them to come back at the future. But this is just to give the overarching landscape.
That sounds good to me.
I think that
So
sounds good.
if I say, no, sorry, we're not taking input right now, or we're not, we're not hearing from individual providers right now, is that how the board wants to conduct?
I'm disappointed by that.
That's awkward.
It is awkward, but it's I could see how this conversation will be like an over-the-shoulder, like, well, wait a minute, did we get that right? Or, oh, well, aren't you guys doing that from the dais? So that's why I'm just trying to sort of get a sense now of, is that okay if we let someone come up and answer a question and go sit back down? Is that okay if we, those are, so it's not awkward and that we're not fighting amongst ourselves or disagreeing amongst ourselves about whether to allow that or not. Jeffrey.
I would welcome slide packs from each of the providers in the overall presentation, but I think given the 45 minutes, let's stick to the strategic landscape. You can have a Harvest for Hunger pitch in there. You can have a Food Bank of the Rockies pitch in there in the overall pre-reading to bring us to the table.
Is it a Tuesday?
It's a Tuesday.
Well, why don't we just make it longer?
It is next week, so any request to, it's whoever can pull together a packet in the next day.
I doubt we'll be able to pull together a slide pack by
No,
Tuesday.
yeah.
They are really in the depths of growing season.
Okay.
So we just start with having the landscape and then schedule
yes.
time and let them come in on a prepared basis if we feel we need to. And if they want to join in and they have an answer to a question, I don't mind calling on them, but having them do a whole presentation.
Too soon for that.
Yeah, I think we need to know the landscape so we know what we're looking for and looking at.
Okay.
So can I
I
just,
think I have a good
some
sense.
criteria for,
Yes.
if staff is going to present landscape, the thing that's going to be most interesting to me is that they understand, what's available, what have we lost in this funding go around, but also what's available locally and how are they using it?
Yeah.
Are they taking advantage of what's available locally?
I think they know.
That's a question I'd like to just clarify.
I think that's what they're preparing.
And are we gonna need to fill gaps?
Are we gonna need to what?
They're going to ask us to,
I know, so that's what I wanna know. What are they gonna ask us?
For budding?
and what
Is that
what other options are there?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think how I'm going to conduct that is we'll hear from staff. We'll ask our questions of staff, depending on how all that goes, if there's some remaining time and we have any input or clarification we'd like to seek from any of the providers in the room, we'll do that. And we'll
And
keep
if,
to 45 minutes.
if we feel we need to have future presentations, we can schedule time just for that.
Thank you.
And give them a little more leeway to be prepared.
I appreciate the direction. Let's see.
I have a really fun future agenda.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Is the board available on June the 26th? It's a Thursday. The plan with Open Space and Trails is to do a ribbon cutting for the Stutzman, for the Dolores Stutzman Bridge. Dolores Stutzman Bridge.
Sure.
Okay, I told Open Space I would run it by you. So that's a Thursday. It's like from 5 to something. So if you guys have a coalition meeting, I don't know your coalition.
I don't,
Transportation Coalition.
It is on that day.
Well, it would be done, it would be at 5 o'clock, so,
So 5 to
June
6 or
26th?
something.
yeah.
and it's a Thursday?
Uh-huh.
Could be on that day.
And then, but
It
it would
is.
be at 5 o'clock, starting at 5 o'clock.
We're done
Oh.
by then.
Maybe able to come do hi bye.
Yeah, you can wave on the bus on your way home.
Yeah.
Dedication, great.
All right, I will let Jesse know right now. Thank you, guys.
Why so late in the day?
So people can get there after work.
Yeah, I think so people can, as we know, there might be a coalition meeting, we'd like to have the board there. Because it's,
Unless they want to do it in the morning.
There is a coalition meeting, which is over at 4:30. Perfect.
Mhm.
I'll be up Valley already. I have a future agenda thing.
As do I. Go ahead.
I did buy my tickets. My vacation is the 12th to the 17th
Of June?
of June.
you're already on our thing as being out.
And, well, I wasn't sure if I was going the 11th or 12th, so. And I did speak to Rye about the Carbondale pool and whether it was possible to do this money outside of Pickens County from the Parks Fund. And I'm bringing it up at future agendas to see if we want to have them come and present. And did you find anything different than what Rye told me?
You stole my open discussion item.
Okay, well, I can wait. I just was thinking might need to plan to have somebody come in.
I can go to, so to your point of, we understand from Rye that the code doesn't specifically address it, but and you all could consider that for the Carbondale pool. However, we have not yet had a chance to fully understand what are all the other staff. There is an understanding that we need to go back and look that the board might have designated some of those funds for the Whitewater Park. So we need to, at the staff level, get a better understanding of what funds would be available and what are some of the other projects that would be on that list for consideration too. So can you give us another week?
Before we decide whether or not to have the pool come in. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Fancy, for following up.
And I just wanted to provide some clarification about our joint meeting with Open Space for June 3rd, based on conversation with Gary. We have our non-executive session time with Open Space and Trails is listed for the Brush Creek to AABC Trail. They want that conversation to be very narrowly related to the engineering studies that they have procured so far about the stretch along Shale Bluffs and the viability of that, and to get our input on that. Not a full conversation about the status of the project or our position on the project. They anticipate that will come back later in the year.
Yeah, I heard
for
the
a
same from
full
Gary.
order.
I'm totally okay with that.
So just, that's what that hour, 55 minutes is slated to cover. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. And that, I think, is all I have for future agendas. Does anyone else have other items for future agendas?
On the 28th,
Yes.
I should be back. I noticed that you scheduled the entrance to Aspen Rezo later in the meeting, so I should be able to be here.
Great, thank you.
Unless my grandson has other plans, which, knowing a 6-year-old, could happen, but I
yeah.
doubt it.
That's exciting.
I might just bring him with me, put him on the bus, send him home afterwards.
Okay, that's a pretty thin agenda on the 28th. Is that really it?
There's Till's time.
We anticipate there's a few more coming on board. I know Rye had a couple he was gonna add on, but I don't think they've been, it might be updated now.
It's great for me to know, because we don't have after school camp that day, so I gotta plan my life. All right, any other future agendas? All right, let's roll into open discussion. We covered what you had.
Yep.
You have other ones?
The only other one is, I believe Charlotte shared with you the Albert Schweitzer proclamation.
Oh, yeah, I didn't have a chance to print
You
it
know,
out.
you can just give
It's a sheet,
edits
but-
that will be coming before the board on June 25th. So you got a month.
Okay, so we have
There
some
we-
time.
time to set it up.
There was a typo in it, but I think we got that
Francie, did you have
fixed.
something? You look like you may have had something. No? You're good? Okay. Anyone else have open discussion items? No? All right.
Mine was just about the bridge, and I just sent Jesse that that date works for us.
Great.
So hopefully it'll work for them. They just got to get the deck laid.
All righty. All right, well, if that is all, then we can adjourn for today and this week.
Good job,
And we-
Kelly.
Oh, sorry, today, and we will resume Thursday morning for our airport planning conversation here at 9 o'clock. Okay, thank you all.
Yes, we will.